The first time Santa spoke to me, he didn't say, ho ho ho. He said my full name first, middle, last, softly, like he was checking attendance. I was 19 and working the photo kiosk near the mall's Santa set, and my name wasn't on a sign, not on my shirt, not anywhere a stranger could read from 20 feet away. He looked straight at me through the beard and the bright lights, and for a second the crowd noise dropped away in my head like someone had shut a door. My co-worker Danny nudged me. "That Santa just called you out," she whispered, grinning. I forced a laugh and went back to my monitor, telling myself he'd overheard it from someone else in line. In December, you learn to accept strange things. As normal strangers crying, strangers hugging, strangers wearing costumes in public. I tried to file it under harmless weirdness, the kind you forget by the time you clock out. An hour later, the elf attendant waved me over with a glossy packet. "Reprint," she said. "Santa wants it brighter." I carried the replacement across the fake snow rug, stepping around the plastic sleigh and hollow gift boxes. Up close, the suit looked older than it should have. The white trim slightly dingy, the belt buckle scratched. The man inside it sat perfectly still, shoulders relaxed, hands open like patience was part of the costume. When I held out the photo, he didn't take it right away. "Your hands are colder today," he said. His voice wasn't the booming performance voice. It was low and calm, like someone talking to you in a hallway when no one else is listening. I told him I was fine. He tilted his head. "You keep your gloves in the left pocket of your green jacket," he said, "but you never wear them because the thumb seam bothers you." That detail hit like a shove. Those gloves existed. That seam bothered me. I'd complained about it exactly once yesterday to Danny behind the kiosk. I glanced at the elf attendant, expecting laughter, expecting a prank. She was already turning away to manage the line. I tried to turn fear into a joke. "Santa knows everything right," I said. He finally took the photo carefully, like it mattered. "Not everything," he said. "Just what people leave behind." He leaned forward a little and lowered his voice. "Your mother keeps a spare key under the second flower pot. Not the first," he said. "She thinks she's clever." The air in my chest went thin. We did have a spare key, and my mum did keep it under the second pot because she'd read somewhere burglars check the obvious places first. I hadn't told anyone outside the house. I stepped back off the rug and said "Merry Christmas" too fast, already turning away. Behind me, in the same calm tone, he added, "Tell her not to park under the flickering light by the north entrance. It shorts out, and she hates walking in the dark." Back at the kiosk, Danny saw my face change. "What did he say?" she asked. I lied, because the truth sounded insane. "He's really in character," I said, and my hands kept moving scan crop print while my head replayed his words. "A stranger should not know where your spare key is. A stranger should not talk about your mother like he has watched her." At closing, I asked the elf attendant what Santa's name was. "Gordon," she said, with a shrug. That night, I called the staffing company from my bedroom and asked to confirm the assignment. The woman on the phone sounded tired and certain. "Your Santa starts next Monday," she said. "His name is Gordon Pritchard." My mouth went dry. "He's already there," I said. There was a pause, then, "No, he isn't," like she was talking to someone who refused to read a calendar. The next day I told my manager the man in the chair might not be hired. He frowned like I'd reported a spill and told me not to start drama during peak season. When I insisted, he waved me off and told me to call security if I was so worried. It hit me then how easy it is for someone to exist in the gaps between other people's responsibilities. Staff assumes security checked. Security assumes staff checked. Everyone assumes a red suit equals permission. Security arrived after lunch, 2 guards with radios, and the tired look of men who spend December breaking up arguments over parking. They walked onto the rug and spoke to Santa politely. Santa nodded calm and agreeable, and then one guard asked for a badge. Santa stood, and for the first time I saw how quick his movement was, how little the suit weighed on him. He smiled at the guards, then looked past them, and found me. "You're here because she saw me," he said, and his eyes held mine like we shared a secret. One guard turned his head to follow Santa's gaze, and in that half second, Santa stepped backward through the staff curtain. The curtain swung, showing a concrete hallway and a service door propped open with a wedge of wood. By the time the guards pushed through, he was gone. They searched the hallway and loading dock and found nothing, and the manager shut the set down, while parents complained like their inconvenience was the real emergency. That night, my mum dragged me to the grocery store for flour. We parked under the flickering light by the north entrance, and I grabbed her elbow and steered her away, joking that it felt creepy. She laughed at me, and we walked inside, but I kept looking over my shoulder the whole time. When we got home, the porch light was on and a red gift bag sat on the doormat. I lifted the white tissue paper and found a single photo in a clear sleeve, the kind my kiosk prints. It was me, in our kitchen, wearing my green jacket looking down at my phone. The angle was wrong for any window. It was taken from inside the house a few feet behind me. In the dark reflection of the window behind my head was a sliver of red suit, a white beard and pale eyes watching me. On the back, in neat handwriting, I never left. On Christmas Eve, I woke up to heavy footsteps above my bedroom, slow and deliberate, like someone pacing on the roof. For one stupid second, my half-asleep brain tried to name it as Santa, the childhood story your body remembers, even after your mind outgrows it. Then the steps paused directly over my ceiling fan, and I realized roofs don't usually carry weight that evenly, and no one I knew should have been up there at 2 a.m. I crept into the hallway and found my mum already awake, phone in hand, eyes wide. We moved to the living room together. Christmas lights blinked along the window like a heartbeat. Outside, the neighborhood was still street lamps, casting pale circles on the snow. My mum raised the blinds an inch. Her face rose into view on the other side of the glass, inches from the window framed by a white beard and the edge of a red hat. Someone was standing on our porch, looking in with the patience of someone who expects to be let inside. The porch light flickered, and in that sick strobe I saw the eyes, clearly pale, watery blue, the same eyes I'd seen under the mall's Santa beard. My mum made a small sound, like her body had forgotten how to scream. The man outside tapped the glass once gently, like a reminder. He smiled, not playful, not friendly, more like he was pleased we were awake. I backed away and dialed 911. The call rang once, and then dropped into dead silence. No signal. I tried again. Nothing. My phone was a useless rectangle in my hand, and my throat tasted like pennies. A scrape came from the side of the house, then a soft metallic click at the back door, slow and patient, like someone testing a lock without urgency. My mum whispered. Where did he go? I didn't answer, because I already knew. We heard the doorknob turn once, then stop. A moment later, a voice drifted through the door, muffled but clear, polite as customer service. Ma'am, it said, I'm sorry to bother you. I'm Santa. I'm looking for help. I lost my bag in the snow. I just need to use your phone. I know it's late. Then he said my mom's first name, the way only people close to her ever said it, and my mom's hand flew to her mouth. The doorknob turned again, slow as a test. When it didn't give, he sighed, almost disappointed. You're smart, he said, still calm. But you leave things behind. Something scraped along the bottom seam of the door, searching for a gap. I remembered the spare key under the second flower pot. The detail he'd said at the mall like trivia, and I realized he hadn't been guessing. He'd been taking notes. I had moved the key after the mall incident, but the thought of him checking anyway made my stomach twist. A thud came from below us, from the basement bulkhead door, followed by a second thud that made the walls feel hollow. My mum started to stand instinct, dragging her toward the kitchen, and I pulled her back down behind the couch. We stayed there, listening, while the house settled around us like a trap. After a minute, the back door went quiet. No scraping, no voice. Just the furnace and the clock. The silence was worse than the noise, because silence is where you imagine hands turning locks you can't see. I risked a glance toward the kitchen and saw a small box on the floor, just inside the back door, wrapped in plain red paper with no bow, as if it had been delivered. It wasn't there before. My mum shook her head at me, pleading without words. Through the front window, I saw him again, already walking away. He didn't run. He raised one gloved hand in a lazy farewell and slipped into the dark beyond the street lamps. I yanked the blinds up and stared at the snow. There were footprints leading away from our porch, only one set. They began at the edge of the porch steps, as if the person had simply appeared there, and they ended at the curb where the street had been plowed clean. When the first car finally passed and the neighborhood felt awake, my phone suddenly had signal again. 911 went through like nothing had happened. Police arrived, checked every door and window, and found no forced entry. The back door was locked. The basement was locked. They took the red box anyway and told us to keep the lights on and call again if anything changed. At the station, they slid the contents across a metal table, one photo and one note. The photo was a glossy print from my kiosk. I could see myself in the background, with my counter head down, working. Behind me in the dark reflection of the glass display was his face, white beard, red hat, pale eyes, watching from a place no customer could have stood. The note was on plain white paper, folded twice. 3 lines, in neat handwriting. You saw me. You remembered. Now I get to remember you. Under that was a name, like a label, not a signature, Gordon Pritchard. The officer asked if that name meant anything to me, and I told him it was the name the staffing company had on file for the Santa who was supposed to start next Monday. When we got home, I checked my voicemail. One message had come in during the night, time-stamped at 2:07 a.m. It was only breathing at first, slow and close to the microphone, and then that familiar low voice said, "Stop leaving things behind." The recording ended with a soft exhale, and somewhere in the background I heard a faint jingle of bells, close enough to mean he hadn't been far from our house when my phone finally got signal again. I didn't sleep after the voicemail because once you hear a stranger breathe like he's standing in the same room, your brain starts measuring every shadow as distance. By morning, the police report read like a polite fiction. No forced entry, unknown suspect, keep doors locked, call if seen again. They took the red box and the photo and the note, and they promised a patrol car would swing by more frequently, which sounded like something they said to make my mother stop shaking. The part they didn't write down was the way my phone lost signal, exactly when his face was pressed to our window, or the way the footprints began at the porch steps like he'd been dropped there from the sky, or the fact that he knew our spare key spot before I'd ever had reason to tell anyone. When the officers left, my mum started moving through the house like she could scrub fear off the surfaces with disinfectant. She rearranged Christmas decorations, wiped counters that were already clean, kept checking the locks, as if she could tighten them by staring. I couldn't stop thinking about them all, about how he'd sat in public for days and walked out the staff curtain like he belonged there. If this was a person, a real person, then the only place he could have learned so much about me was through proximity and access, and that meant he'd had a way to watch without being noticed. So I drove back to the mall the day after Christmas, when the parking lot looked bruised and tired, half empty, the holiday music still playing out of habit. The Santa set was dismantled. Velvet ropes, rolled up fake trees leaned against a wall like dead props. I found my manager in the office and asked to see the security footage from the week Santa disappeared. He stared at me like I'd asked for his social security number. "That's corporate," he said. "That's security. We don't just pull footage because you're spooked." I told him the staffing company said the real Santa hadn't even started yet, and I watched his face tighten at the inconvenience of a problem that might require paperwork. He called security anyway, annoyed, not alarmed, and the head of security met me near the back hallway with the kind of practiced patience reserved for teenagers shoplifting lip gloss. He listened, asked for dates, asked for times, asked me to describe the man. I described the eyes. I described the voice. I described the grip on my wrist. The guard nodded, like he was filing it into a drawer marked seasonal nonsense. Then he took me into the security office, a small room with monitors stacked like aquarium glass, and he rewound footage from the Santa set camera. The image popped up, the fake snow rug, the chair, the elf attendant, the line of families. My stomach tightened, because seeing it on a screen made it feel both more real and more impossible. "There," I said, pointing at the chair. The guard paused the footage and frowned. The chair was empty. Not empty as in no Santa at that moment, but empty in the sense that it looked like any other slow-day elf attendant shifting her weight. Parents glancing at their phones, a kid picking at a candy cane prop. He was right there, I insisted, leaning closer until my breath fogged the glass. The guard scrubbed forward and backward through the timeline. Families moved through the line, posed, smiled at nothing, handed babies to air, and the elf attendant pantomimed conversation toward the empty chair as if someone were sitting there. It wasn't a trick of timing. It was like the footage believed the Santa chair had never been occupied at all. The guard looked at me slowly. "You sure you've got the right camera?" he asked, and my face went hot with the humiliation of not being believed. I made him pull the angle from the second camera, then the third. Same thing. The chair, the rug, the line, the elf, and nothing where the man should have been. I heard myself say, "That's impossible," and the guard shrugged. "Cameras glitch," he said, but his voice didn't sound like he believed that either. He checked the metadata and swore under his breath. "This is weird," he admitted, and that admission did something to my spine, like my bones had been waiting for permission to be afraid. He pulled up a different feed, a hallway camera that covered the staff curtain behind the set. There I saw the rep from staffing march in, and I saw the curtain swing, and I saw the guards enter, and then the feed froze for exactly 12 seconds. 12 seconds of a still image, while everyone in the hall moved like ghosts behind the ghost. Pause. When it resumed, the door at the end of the hall was propped open, so the camera didn't catch him, the guard said half to himself. Or it did, and he didn't finish. My mouth felt numb. A human can hide from a camera by stepping around it, by using blind spots, by knowing the building. But you don't erase yourself from 3 angles while leaving everyone else intact, and you don't freeze a feed at the exact moment you need it unless you have access to the system. The guard kept digging, and his frustration turned sharper, less dismissive. "Who has admin access?" I asked. He stared at the screen. "Corporate," he said, "and our vendor, and maintenance." He said that last word like it tasted wrong. The mall had a rotating crew of contractors, electricians, cleaning crews, seasonal decor installers. People who came in through service entrances moved through back hallways, wore lanyards. Nobody checked because they looked like work. I walked out of that office with my head buzzing and called Danny, because Danny had been there every shift, because Danny had laughed it off, because Danny was the kind of person who believed in prank videos, not predators. She answered on the second ring and sounded tired. "Don't tell me you're still on Santa," she said. I told her about the footage. There was a pause long enough for me to hear her breathing, and then her voice dropped. "Okay," she said. "Okay, that's not funny." She told me she'd found something in her locker last night after closing a small white card with a red ribbon like a gift tag. On it, in neat handwriting, was her name, her full name, and underneath it, "You talk too much." Danny laughed while she told me, but it was the thin laugh people use to keep themselves from crying. I asked where the tag was. "I threw it away," she said. "I didn't want it in my car. I told her not to go anywhere alone. I told her to call security if she saw anything. I told her to come to my house if she wanted." She said she was fine, and we both knew she was lying, because fine doesn't sound like a whisper. 2 hours later, my phone lit up with a text from Danny. "Is this you?" and a photo attachment. It was a grainy image taken from inside a car. A man in a Santa suit stood under a broken parking lot light, holding something long and dark in his hand. The angle was far, but I could see the way he stood still, patient, like time belonged to him. In the reflection of the car window, faint and warped, I could see Danny's face, wide-eyed, and behind her, the outline of the steering wheel. My fingers went cold. I called her. No answer. I called again. No answer. I drove back to the mall so fast my tires hummed, and I found Danny's car in the farthest corner of the lot where the lights didn't quite reach. The driver door was closed. The car was unlocked. Her purse sat on the passenger seat, like she'd just stepped out for a second. Her keys were on the floor mat. The air smelled like old fast food in winter. On the dashboard, placed neatly, as if someone had staged, it was a single, glossy photo print in a clear sleeve. It was a photo of me at my kiosk, head down working, and in the dark reflection of the monitor glass, pale eyes stared back. On the back of the photo, in the same neat handwriting, You keep coming back for what you left behind. I stood there with the photo trembling in my hand, and I realized the most dangerous part wasn't that he could get close. It was that he could make your world feel pointless to fight against. My phone buzzed. One new voicemail, time-stamped 1 minute ago. I held the phone to my ear and heard that calm voice close to the microphone like he was smiling while he spoke. "She won't talk anymore," he said. "Now you have to listen." If you've never been in a mall after hours, you don't understand how quickly a place built for crowds turns into something predatory. The next night I convinced myself I could fix it, because fear does that. It hands you a job so you don't sit still and shake. I told myself Danny had stepped away, that she'd been scared and embarrassed and didn't want to answer her phone. I told myself the voicemail was a sick joke. But my body didn't believe my thoughts. My body believed patterns, and the pattern was that this man appeared when he wanted, vanished when he wanted, and left proof behind like breadcrumbs he expected me to follow. I called the police again and told them Danny was missing, and I suspected the same person. They took the report and asked me what Danny had been wearing and where she'd last been seen, and the officer's voice stayed professional, which in that moment sounded like distance. "We'll send someone to check the mall footage," he said, and I almost laughed, because I knew what the footage would show. An empty chair, a frozen hallway, a world that pretended he wasn't there. After I hung up, my phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. "Service entrance B, 1130. Bring what you took." The message didn't explain what I'd taken, but it didn't need to, because my mind immediately supplied the answer. His attention, his secret, his ability to exist in my life without my permission. I deleted the text and told myself I wasn't going. Then a minute later, a second message arrived. "You have her photo. I have your key." My chest tightened so hard it hurt. I checked the bowl by the front door where my mom kept her keys. The spare house key was gone. My mom swore she hadn't moved it. She swore she hadn't given it to anyone. I watched her face and realized she believed me now, not because she understood how, but because she could see the consequence our home had been touched. I didn't tell her about the meeting text. I told her I was going to drive around and look for Danny's phone ping like I knew what that meant. At 1110, I pulled into the mall parking lot and stayed in my car, with the engine off, watching my breath fog the windshield. The mall sat dark, except for a few security lights, and the distant neon glow of the food court sign. Somewhere inside, a janitor machine hummed like an insect. I could have left. I should have left. But then my phone buzzed again, and the number was still unknown, and the message was just a photo. It was my mother asleep on the couch, head tilted blanket pulled up to her chin, TV paused on a bright holiday movie. The angle wasn't from any place I'd ever stood. It was from the hallway, half hidden behind the door frame, as if someone had been watching quietly to make sure she stayed asleep. My hands went numb. That photo meant one thing: he'd already been inside. My brain stopped arguing about whether I should go to the service entrance, because the decision had been made for me the moment he crossed that line. I drove around to service entrance B, a metal door at the back of the building where deliveries came in, where the air smelled like cardboard and diesel. One overhead light flickered above the loading dock, the same sick pulse as the north entrance light at our grocery store, and I wondered if he chose places where the illumination couldn't be trusted because it made people doubt what they saw. I parked and got out, heart hammering so hard it felt like it was pushing against my ribs. The cold hit my face like a slap. The dock was empty. Then I saw it, a Santa suit hanging from a hook on the wall, limp like a body without a person. The hat drooped. The beard was matted and grey at the edges. The suit looked dirtier than it had at the mall set, as if it had been dragged across concrete. A single red glove lay on the ground beneath it, palm up, fingers curled slightly like it had been dropped mid-gesture. I didn't step closer. I stood at the edge of the light and listened. The building made small noises, metal contracting air vents, sighing, but no footsteps, no voice. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I didn't have to check it to know it would be him. I heard his voice instead, not from the phone, but from behind me, close enough that the words warmed the air at my ear. "You came?" he said, calm and pleased, like I'd proven something. I spun around and saw him standing just beyond the edge of the light, half in shadow, the red suit almost black in the darkness. The beard looked real from that distance, or maybe I just didn't want to look close enough to see the seams. In his hand he held a key ring, and even in the dim light, I recognized the cheap silver tag my mom had on our spare key. "You shouldn't have taken my picture," I said, and the sentence sounded ridiculous the second it left my mouth, like scolding someone for stealing a spoon while they hold a knife. He lifted the key ring slightly, letting it jingle once soft and delicate. "I returned what people leave behind," he said. "You leave your life behind everywhere you go. A kiosk, a schedule, a locker, a screen. You think privacy is a wall, but it's just a door people forget to lock." I forced myself to breathe and tried to anchor on something practical. "Where is Danny?" I asked. The Santa shape tilted his head, the same slow angle I remembered from the chair. "She talked," he said. "Now she's quiet. That's better for everyone." Rage rose in me like heat, but it had nowhere to land because he was still patient, and the darkness around him made him feel untouchable. "You're not Santa," I said. "You're just a guy in a suit." He took one step forward into the flickering light, and for a split second I saw his face clearer. Not old, not young, skin pale from indoor light, eyes washed out, blue mouth set in something that wasn't a smile, but could pretend. "Of course," he said. "Santa is a costume people trust. That's all I need." He reached into his coat and pulled out a plastic badge on a lanyard. My stomach dropped when I saw the mall logo and the word maintenance printed beneath it. "You don't ask questions when someone carries a ladder," he said. "You don't ask questions when someone wears a uniform." He turned the badge so I could read the name printed on it, Gordon Pritchard. "You stole a dead man's name," I whispered, and he shrugged like names were just tools. "He won't need it," he said, "but you will." He stepped back and motioned toward the service door with a small sweep of his gloved hand. "Come inside," he said. "I'll give you what you want. I'll give you what you lost." My feet stayed planted. Every part of me screamed that if I crossed that threshold, the story would end in a place cameras didn't record. I backed away, keeping my eyes on him, hand slipping into my pocket for my phone. The screen flashed "No service," and I almost laughed again because of course it did. "You can't stop the police," I said, trying to sound confident, trying to make the world obey rules again. His head tilted. "The police come when they can see the problem," he said. "I'm careful about being seen." Then his voice softened, almost kind. "Your mother sleeps lightly," he added. "She hears the house. She hears the pipes. She hears the wind. She'll hear me." My throat tightened so hard I could barely swallow. I didn't think. I moved, sprinting for my car, with my lungs burning, the cold air shredding my breath. Behind me I heard a single soft jingle, not from bells but from keys. I slammed my door, turned the ignition, and the engine hesitated for half a second too long before catching. When I looked up, he was gone. No footsteps, no movement. Just the hanging Santa suit on the wall and the limp glove on the ground, like evidence meant to be found. I drove home so fast I barely felt the turns. The whole way my phone stayed dead no bars, like the world itself had been muted. When I pulled into my driveway, the porch light was on, steady, not flickering. The front door was slightly open. I ran inside and found the living room empty. The TV was on, volume low, playing a cheerful scene where a family laughed around a tree. My mum's blanket was folded neatly on the couch, as if someone had smoothed it. On the coffee table sat a small red gift bag. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was our spare keyring, and underneath it a single printed photo in a clear sleeve. Danny in a dim room, eyes wide, lips pressed together like she'd been told not to speak, and in the background, slightly out of focus, the edge of a Santa, beard, and pale eyes watching. On the back of the photo, in neat handwriting, "You brought me home." The worst part wasn't that my mother was gone. It was that the house looked like she'd never been there at all, like someone had erased her in a hurry, but still took the time to make it neat. The blanket she'd been using, was folded into a tight rectangle on the couch. The mug she'd left on the table was rinsed and upside down in the drying rack. The Christmas lights blinked in the window with the same steady rhythm as always, cheerful and stupid as if the world refused to acknowledge what had changed. I ran room to room calling her name until my throat burned, and the only answer was the soft hum of the refrigerator and the low canned laughter from the holiday movie still playing on TV. I checked the bathrooms, the closets, the garage, the backyard, even the shed, because fear turns you into someone who believes impossible hiding places might hold a miracle. Her phone was on the kitchen counter, plugged in like she'd left it there before falling asleep. That detail hollowed me out more than anything else, because it meant she hadn't walked out on her own. Not for a real reason, not with her mind intact. People don't leave without their phone anymore. It's a second heart. I tried to call 911, and the call went through, but my hands shook so hard I had to brace the phone against my cheek. When the operator asked what my emergency was, my voice came out calm, in a way that scared me, like some part of me had switched into survival mode and shut down my ability to sound human. I told her my mother was missing. I told her about the man in the Santa suit, and I heard myself say the words maintenance badge, like I was reporting a broken appliance. The police arrived fast, faster than the night before, and that almost felt like proof that the system still worked, that rules still mattered, until I watched them walk through my house with polite professionalism and realized they were searching a normal home for a normal threat, and what we had wasn't normal. They asked if my mother had dementia, asked if she was depressed, asked if she'd ever left before without telling anyone. Their questions weren't cruel. They were the shapes they had for problems. I showed them the photo of Danny and the handwriting on the back. I played them the voicemail with the breathing and the calm voice. One officer's expression tightened for the first time, but then he looked around my living room at the clean counters and the steady lights and the locked doors, and you could see his mind trying to reconcile evidence with a scene that didn't match the panic in my body. "No forced entry," he said again, as if that phrase could unmake what had happened. I led them to the back door, showed them the intact locks, showed them the porch where the red gift bag had appeared before. Outside the snow held the truth, better than any camera. There were footprints near the porch, steps only one sat. They pressed deep, as if whoever made them had been carrying weight, and they angled away toward the side yard, where our fence met the neighbor's shrubs. The footprints didn't continue to the sidewalk. They stopped at a patch of snow that looked disturbed, and then impossibly nothing. One officer crouched and ran a gloved finger along the edge, as if he could feel the answer. "Wind drift," he said, but his tone wasn't confident. I saw him glance up at the roofline, and for a second he looked like he was listening for something he didn't want to hear. They took statements. They asked for recent photos of my mother. They asked for her routine. I kept expecting one of them to say the obvious thing out loud, that someone had been watching us, that someone had planned this, that the Santa suit wasn't a joke but a mask, and instead they moved through their checklist, because checklists keep you from drowning in other people's fear. When they finally left promising patrols and phone calls, my house felt larger and emptier, like it had expanded to hold the absence. I sat on the couch and stared at the gift bag on the table, the one he'd left, like a signature, and I realized he hadn't just taken my mother, he'd taken the part of my home that made it mine. He'd been inside long enough to rinse her mug, long enough to fold her blanket, long enough to decide what the scene should look like. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Check the stockings." My stomach dropped. I walked to the fireplace without thinking, because when someone demonstrates they can enter your life whenever they want, you start obeying, even when you hate yourself for it. My mother had hung 3 stockings, hers, mine, and one that belonged to my father before he left years ago, and my mom couldn't bring herself to throw away. I reached into my stocking, and my fingers brushed paper. I pulled out a folded sheet, and my hands started shaking again. It was a printed page, like something from an HR file with my name, my address, my work schedule, my emergency contact, my mother's full name, and a list of my shifts at the kiosk for the entire season. In the margin, in the same neat handwriting as the notes on the photos, were 2 words, "Very helpful." I stared at it until the letters blurred. That information had come from my job, from a system that treated employee data like harmless paperwork. Suddenly the mall felt less like a building and more like a mouth. I checked my mother's stocking next. Inside was her spare keyring, the one he'd dangled at the loading dock, and attached to it was a tiny red tag with a date written on it. December 31. Under the date, midnight. The message wasn't subtle. It was an appointment. A countdown. I told myself not to play his game, and then my phone buzzed again, and this time it wasn't a text, it was a photo. My mother, in a dim room, sitting upright, eyes open but unfocused, hands folded in her lap as if someone had posed her. A strip of tinsel was wrapped around her wrists, like decoration bright and cruel. Behind her, just barely visible, was a string of Christmas lights and a concrete wall. It looked like a back hallway somewhere, like the service corridors at the mall. My knees went weak. I sank to the floor and pressed my palm against my mouth to keep from making noise, because something in me still believed if I stayed quiet, he wouldn't hear. Then I noticed something in the corner of the photo. A small square vent cover the kind my house had in the basement by the furnace. The realization hit so hard I felt nauseous. He wasn't just using the mall. He was using my home like a tunnel. I went to the basement door and listened, holding my breath. At first, there was nothing. Then faintly a sound, like the one he described at the mall, the one from my recurring dream. A soft, clicking, rhythmic patient like a latch, being tested from the other side. I should have run outside. I should have called the police back and waited on the street in the cold until someone arrived. Instead, I did the thing people do when they are desperate to turn terror into a solvable problem. I opened the basement door. The smell hit first damp concrete and dust, and something faintly sweet like cheap peppermint. I flicked the light on and went down, one step at a time, every nerve, screaming that I was walking into the place my subconscious had been warning me about for weeks. The basement was exactly as it had always been. Boxes, an old treadmill, holiday decorations stacked in plastic bins. Except for one new detail, the furnace vent cover had been removed and set carefully on the floor screws aligned beside it, like someone had taken time to be tidy. Beyond the dark vent opening was a narrow crawl space leading under the house. A thin line of glitter dusted the concrete near the opening silver, and stubborn the same kind that had stayed in the crease of my wrist after he grabbed me. I backed away so fast my heel caught the edge of a storage bin, and it clattered loud in the silence. The clicking stopped immediately. For 2 seconds there was nothing but my breathing. Then from inside the crawl space a calm voice spoke soft and close, like he was inches away in the dark. "You're getting better," he said. "You're finally looking where you should have looked first." My skin went cold all at once. I didn't respond because I couldn't. The voice continued, patient, almost approving. "Bring the photo of the girl," it said. "Bring the paper from your stocking. Bring what you took. Midnight December 31st. If you call the police again, you'll get a different picture next time, and you won't like what's missing." Then I heard something move in the crawl space. A slow drag of fabric against dirt, and the light in the basement flickered once, as if the house itself had blinked. I ran up the stairs, slammed the door, shoved the chair under the knob, like that would matter, and stood in my kitchen shaking so hard my teeth clicked. On the counter, my mother's rinsed mug sat upside down, spotless, as if someone had washed away every trace of her hands on purpose. By the time the sun went down, I understood the real trap he didn't need to keep me from calling for help. He just needed to make help feel useless. I called the police anyway, because even if they couldn't see what I saw, I needed witnesses in the world, anchors that proved I wasn't losing my mind. They came back, took another report, and this time when I told them about the crawl space voice, I watched their faces shift from disbelief into something else, concern not just for me, but for the shape of the case. They searched my basement with flashlights, and gloves lifted the vent cover, looked into the crawl space. One officer crawled in a few feet, then backed down, dust on his uniform, jaw tight. "It connects to the outside," he said. "There's an access point near the side yard." They checked it and found a section of lattice loosened, as if someone had been using it like a door. They sealed it temporarily, told me to stay somewhere else, offered to call social services or family. I had neither, in a way that mattered. and my mother's absence made leaving feel like surrendering the only place I might find evidence. The officers finally admitted they needed the mall's cooperation in digital forensics, and one of them used a phrase that chilled me: insider access. When they left promising follow-ups, the house grew quiet again, but it wasn't the quiet of safety. It was the quiet of a stage between acts. I sat at my kitchen table with the HR printout from the stocking spread in front of me and realized the cleanest way to hurt someone is not to attack their body first. It's to prove you can reach every part of their life without leaving a bruise. The next morning I drove to the staffing company office in Strip Mall, the kind of place where nothing dramatic ever seems to happen. I told the receptionist I needed to speak to someone about Gordon Pritchard. The name made her blink like I'd said something outdated. She disappeared into the back and returned with a manager, a woman with tired eyes and a smile practiced for angry clients. I explained everything as plainly as I could. The Santa at the mall, the badge, the name, my missing coworker, my missing mother. The manager's smile slipped in a way that was almost human. Gordon Pritchard, she repeated slowly. Where did you get that name? I told her. She looked down at her computer, typed for a long time, and then her face changed again, sharper, now, like she'd bumped into something that hurt. He's not an active employee, she said. He hasn't been for years. My throat tightened. He was scheduled to start next Monday, I said. That's what you told me. She nodded, but not like she agreed, like she was following a thread. That's what the system said, she admitted. But the profile is old. She turned her monitor slightly so I could see. The file on the screen had a photo ID attached, but the face was blurred, like the image had been scanned too many times. The birth date field was blank. The emergency contact was listed as N.A. The notes section contained a single line: do not call home number. The manager's hands trembled, just a little, as she scrolled. This account shouldn't exist in the scheduling pool, she whispered, as if saying it too loudly might make it worse. I asked her what she meant. She swallowed and said Gordon Pritchard died. The word died landed heavy finally, the way it always does when it's used as a fact instead of a fear. I stared at her. When I asked, she clicked through screens, then shook her head. I can't give you personal details, she said automatically. But her eyes were wet now, not with sympathy for me, but with the shock of recognizing the kind of administrative mistake that becomes tragedy. But I can tell you this, she added, lowering her voice. Someone resurrected that profile. Someone with access. Someone who knew where to look. Outside, in the parking lot, the air felt too bright. I sat in my car and tried to breathe, because my brain was doing the math again. If he stole a dead man's name, it meant he could move through systems as a ghost, and ghosts don't get caught by normal procedures because they aren't supposed to. Be that. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. A single sentence. Dead people don't complain. I drove straight to the mall and demanded to speak to the head of security again. This time, I didn't ask politely. I told them my mother was missing. My coworker was missing, and their systems had been compromised. The head of security looked exhausted and defensive, but when I mentioned the staffing manager had said Gordon Pritchard was deceased, his face tightened in a way that told me he already knew something. He took me into his office, shut the door, and pulled up a file on his own computer that wasn't the camera feed. We had a maintenance contractor years ago, he said slowly. Name was Gordon Pritchard. Died in an accident on site. He said accident the way people say the word when they wanted to cover everything that comes after. His badge was deactivated, he added. His credentials were removed. He paused and then admitted the part that turned my stomach, but the badge number has been pinging doors. My mouth went numb. Pinging, I repeated. He nodded, unwilling. Service entrances. Storage corridors. The access that doesn't show up on customer cameras. Whoever has it, they're using it. He slid his monitor toward me. On the screen was a log of door entries, timestamps, locations, badge, ID. Most were normal cleaning crew deliveries, until you hit the anomaly's late-night access to the decor storage. Repeated entries into the service corridor behind the Santa set, and worst of all, a door log from 2 nights ago showing badge. Access to the emergency stairway, that connected to the roof. My skin prickled. Santa on the roof. The footsteps. The pacing above my bedroom. I realized then the story wasn't confined to my house. It had simply followed the same blueprint everywhere. Higher ground, blind spots, doors other people don't think about. The head of security looked at me with something like regret. "We need corporate," he said. "We need law enforcement with warrants. This is bigger than a trespasser." My phone buzzed again. Photo. Danny closer this time. Eyes glossy with tears she hadn't let fall, and beside her, just in frame, a red-gloved hand holding a strip of tinsel like a leash. Under the photo, a message: "You like officers? Come back to mine." Then a second message, as if he wanted to be sure I understood. December 31, midnight. Don't bring them. I looked up at the security chief and realized the cruelest part was how he could force choices that all felt wrong to obey, and risk walking into a place no one could follow, or bring police, and risk him punishing my mother and Danny for my pause. Defiance. The chief started talking about task forces and digital logs and coordinating with detectives, but his voice faded under the louder truth. Beating in my chest, this man had turned the holiday into a timetable, and every blinking Christmas light in my house now felt like a countdown I couldn't stop. As I left the mall, the giant seasonal banner above the entrance swayed slightly in the HVAC draft, and for a second I imagined him behind it perfectly still, watching people walk beneath words like peace and joy, waiting for midnight like it belonged to him. The next 48 hours felt like living inside a countdown nobody else could hear. Every normal thing people did to slide into the new year, grocery shopping, streaming parties, texting plans, looked obscene against the simple fact that my mother had vanished and my coworker had vanished, and the only person setting the schedule was a man in a Santa suit who could make cameras forget him. The police treated it like two linked missing person cases with an unknown offender. The mall treated it like a systems breach and a liability, and I treated it like a trap that had already closed. Because once someone proves they can enter your home through a crawl space, they don't need threats anymore. They just need time. The head of mall security called me in the afternoon, voice tight, and said corporate had finally authorized a deeper audit of access logs and camera integrity. He didn't sound proud. He sounded like someone admitting the building had been sick for a while, and nobody wanted to name it. He told me they found repeated door entries tied to the old Gordon badge in places that didn't make sense for any current workflow. Decor, storage, electrical closets, the roof, stairwell, and a sealed corridor that had been out of service for years after a renovation. He called it the lower-level maintenance office, like it was a normal label. I asked him what was down there. He hesitated, and then said, "Old contractor space. It's been locked since the accident." He didn't say the word died this time, but it sat behind his teeth anyway. He asked if I could come to the mall immediately, because they needed someone who recognized patterns, and I almost laughed at the idea that my trauma qualified as expertise. But I went because staying home felt like sitting beside an open basement door and pretending the dark wasn't listening. The mall in late December is a drained animal. The crowds thin, the seasonal workers disappear, and the building exhales the last of its forced cheer into empty corridors. When I arrived, security met me at a service entrance and led me through the back hallways. I'd only ever glimpsed through the Santa curtain, concrete floors, fluorescent lights, doors labeled with numbers instead of store names. We walked past a stack of dismantled fake trees, bins of ornaments, and a cart of red fabric that looked like shed skin. The farther we went, the quieter it got, until I could hear my own breathing and the distant thump of a janitor's buffer somewhere above us. The head of security stopped at a grey metal door with chipped paint and an old keypad. "This is it," he said. He swiped a MasterCard, and the keypad blinked red. "Denied," he muttered. He tried again. "Denied." His jaw tightened. "It's pinging from inside," he said, tapping his tablet. "The log shows entries, but the system won't accept current admin credentials." My skin went cold. That meant whoever was using the badge had changed something, or the door had been rewired to obey a different authority. The head of security called in a maintenance supervisor, a man with cracked knuckles and a practical face that had probably fixed every kind of leak and short this building could offer. The supervisor crouched by the door, popped a small panel and stared at the wiring longer than made sense for a simple lock. "This isn't standard," he said finally. "Someone bypassed the controller. They're feeding it a signal directly." He glanced up at us like he wished he hadn't said that out loud. "Can you open it?" the head of security asked. The supervisor exhaled and said, "If I cut power, yes, but whatever's in there will know." The building seemed to lean closer in that moment, as if it could hear us discussing its nerves. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and my stomach tightened before I even looked, because dread trains you faster than logic. Unknown number. One sentence. "Don't break my door." Under it, a photo fresh time-stamped, less than a minute ago. The three of us in that hallway, security chief, maintenance supervisor, and me, captured from an angle above the doorframe as if someone had been perched near the ceiling. My face in the photo was pale and tense, and behind my shoulder in the reflection of the grey door there was a faint smear of red like a suit caught in glass. The maintenance supervisor swore the first truly human sound in that sterile hallway and stepped back from the panel as if the wires had bitten him. The head of security's hand hovered near his radio. How did he started and then stopped, because asking how had become the most useless question in our lives. I didn't want to look at the door anymore. I wanted to look away and never look back, but I forced myself to stare at it until my eyes watered because I needed my fear to become something specific. The head of security told me to go home, to stay somewhere safe, to let law enforcement handle it. He meant well. He sounded like a man who'd finally realized the building had been trusting uniforms too much. I told him there was no safe place if the offender already had my mother and Danny and my key. He looked at me the way adults look at young women who refuse to be reasonable, and I hated that the world still tried to make my terror seem like a personality flaw. As we walked back toward the main service corridor, the maintenance supervisor lagged behind and then caught up, lowering his voice. Years ago, he said Gordon was one of ours. He knew every crawl, every duct, every blind spot. He used to say the mall was a living thing, like you could feel where it was weak. He paused, swallowing. After the accident, they sealed his office because nobody wanted the reminder. But people kept finding little things. Stuff left where it shouldn't be. A glove, a key, a tag. He glanced at me, eyes tired. We called it pranks, because the alternative was worse. My phone buzzed again before I could respond. Another message, same unknown number, you learned his name. Now, you know where he worked. Attached was a photo of my mother, closer than before, her eyes open but empty tinsel still around her wrists, and behind her a wall plaque. I recognized instantly, because I'd seen it 100 times while walking to my kiosk. Employees. Only, I drove home shaking, not because I didn't believe anymore, but because I believed too much. The house was bright when I arrived, every light on all blinds closed, like you could build safety out of electricity. I checked the basement door first, and found the chair I'd wedged under the knob had been moved and placed neatly against the wall as if someone had corrected my bad carpentry. On the kitchen table, centered like a place setting, sat a small white envelope with a red ribbon. My name was written on it in that same careful handwriting. Inside was a printed invitation on mall letterhead, the kind used for staff memos, and my hands started trembling as soon as I saw the heading, New Year's Eve Maintenance Briefing. Below it, a location, lower level office corridor. Time 11:45 p.m. At the bottom, typed in smaller font, like a standard footer, was one handwritten line that turned my blood to ice because it made the threat feel intimate, like a whisper in my ear. Don't bring them. Bring what you took. I stood there in my own kitchen with a corporate memo in my hand and understood the whole point of the Santa suit, the badge, the stolen name, the tidy folding of blankets. He wanted the cruelty to look official, like the building itself had. Issued the order like compliance. Was the only way to keep the people you loved from being erased completely. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I sat down and stared at the invitation until the paper softened under my fingers, and I made the only decision that still felt like mine. If he wanted a meeting at midnight, he was going to have to face me in a place with doors and logs and walls, not just in dreams and crawl spaces. New Year's Eve arrived with the kind of cold that makes your lungs feel sharp, and the whole world outside my window seemed to be practicing celebration, while my house practiced silence. People drove by with party hats on dashboards, grocery bags clinking with cheap champagne, fireworks stands buzzing with last-minute buys, and it all felt like a different universe running parallel to mine, close enough to see, but impossible to enter. I spent the day doing normal things, with an intensity that felt like ritual. I charged my phone. I wrote down every number I might need on paper in case the signal died again. I placed my mother's phone in my bag, even though it felt wrong to carry it, and I put the HR printout and Danny's photo in an open envelope, because the invitation had said bring what you took, and I refused to pretend I didn't understand the language of his game. I told the detective assigned to my case that I was scared he would contact me again, and I watched his face carefully when he asked if I had a reason to think that. I didn't tell him about the invitation, not because I trusted the man in the suit, but because the message had already demonstrated it could see through walls, and I couldn't bear the idea of my mother paying for my honesty. Instead, I did something that felt pathetic and desperate. I texted the head of mall security, an apology for being difficult, and asked him casually what areas of the lower level had motion sensors. He didn't answer for hours, and when he did, his reply was a single line. Most of them were disabled after the renovation. That sentence settled in my chest like a stone. At 1:20 p.m., I drove to the mall. Fireworks cracked faintly in the distance from neighborhoods already starting to celebrate the sound like bones snapping far away. The parking lot was almost empty, but the building glowed with a few security lights and the stubborn neon of storefront signs. I parked near a service entrance and sat in my car for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, breathing carefully the way you breathe before you do something you can't undo. My phone showed bars, then dropped to 1, then to none, then back to 1, like someone was playing with the air. I got out anyway. The service door opened with my badge from work, because the mall still trusted employees by default, and that thought made me feel sick. Inside, the air smelled like dust and stale cinnamon from months of scented decorations. The main corridors were dark stores, shuttered behind metal gates, mannequins frozen mid-smile. Somewhere above the mall's background, music was still running at low volume, a soft instrumental carol that sounded like it was coming from underwater. I followed the service hallway toward the lower level, guided by signs customers never see: exit electrical, mechanical. At the stairwell door, I hesitated, listening. No footsteps, no voices, just the building's quiet breathing through vents. I went down. The lower level was colder, the fluorescent lights spaced farther apart, leaving pockets of shadow between pools of buzzing white. The invitation said office corridor, and as I walked, I saw old signage half peeled from walls, faded arrows pointing to areas that no longer existed. It felt like moving through the mall's memory. At the end of a long hallway, I reached the grey door I'd seen earlier, with security. The keypad light was on now, steady green, like it had been waiting. My throat tightened. I didn't touch it. The door clicked on its own and swung inward an inch, an invitation that didn't require my hand. The air that leaked out smelled faintly of peppermint and damp cardboard, the same sickly sweet I'd smelled in my basement crawl space. I pushed the door open and stepped into a room, lit by a single desk lamp. The space looked like a maintenance office that had been abandoned mid-shift. A metal desk, a rolling chair, filing cabinets, shelves stacked with binders, but it was also decorated, and that was what turned my stomach, because the decorations were not cheerful, they were possessive. A strand of Christmas lights had been hung around the ceiling in a crude circle, and in the center of that circle was a Santa chair. Not the mall set chair, but an older one, torn at the seams, the fabric rubbed thin by years of bodies. On the walls were corkboards, covered in gift tags, hundreds of them, each with a name written in neat handwriting, each tag tied with a red ribbon, like a little leash. I saw addresses. I saw phone numbers. I saw schedules. I saw the kind of personal details you only notice if you've watched someone for a long time. On the desk, scented like a holiday centerpiece, sat my mother's mug, the one I'd last seen upside down in my drying rack, now filled with cold black coffee. That was the moment my knees went weak, because it meant he'd brought a piece of my house here, or he'd brought this room into my house, and either way he had collapsed the distance between my life and his. On time, a voice said from the corner, calm and pleased. He stepped into the lamp's light, wearing the Santa suit, but cleaner, now brushed, composed the beard, fuller the hat, straight, like he'd prepared for a photograph. His eyes were the same, pale blue, unreadable, and patient. In his gloved hand, he held a ring of keys that chimed softly when he moved. "Where are they?" I asked. My voice came out steadier than I felt, and I hated that he might interpret that as confidence. He smiled slightly, like a teacher hearing a predictable question. "You brought what you took?" he asked. I held up the envelope with the HR printout and Dan's photo. He nodded, approval. "Good," he said. "You're learning how to follow instructions." He walked to the desk and picked up a small remote control, the kind used for cheap electronics, and clicked it once. A monitor on the wall flickered to life. Grainy camera footage appeared, and I recognized my own living room, my couch, my Christmas lights, my front window captured from an angle high in the corner. Then the feed switched, and I saw Danny sitting on a concrete floor, her hands in her lap, her mouth pressed, tight eyes swollen from holding back tears. Another click, and my mother appeared, sitting upright, tinsel still around her wrists, staring forward as if she'd been taught to go still. My stomach lurched. "Don't hurt them," I said. He tilted his head slowly, the gesture that used to look like harmless Santa curiosity now revealed his calculation. "I don't hurt," he said. "I organize. I keep. I return." He gestured toward the corkboards. "People leave themselves behind everywhere. I collect the parts. They drop." He stepped closer, and the suit's fabric made a soft whispering sound, like brushed velvet, intimate and wrong. "You're here because you want them back," he said. "But you also want something else. You want the world to believe you." I swallowed hard. "What do you want?" I asked. He smiled wider, showing teeth too, even too calm. "I want you to stop leaving things behind," he said. "And I want you to understand what that means." He pointed to the Santa chair. "Sit," he said gently, like it was a request. I didn't move. His voice stayed calm, but the air changed, the way air changes when a polite person decides to become firm. "Sit," he repeated. The monitor behind him switched feeds without him touching the remote. My mother's eyes shifted slightly, as if she'd been startled, as if someone off-camera had stepped closer to her. The frat didn't need words. I walked to the chair and sat. The fabric was cold and slightly damp, and the armrests were sticky with something that felt like old tape residue. He stepped in front of me and adjusted his belt, slowly, theatrically, like he was preparing for a photo with a child. "Now," he said, "give me what you brought." I handed him the envelope. He opened it carefully, like he respected paper more than people, and took out the HR printout first. He smoothed it on the desk and traced my name with a gloved finger. "Look how easily a person becomes a file," he murmured. Then he lifted Danny's photo and held it up beside my face, as if comparing. "She talked," he said softly. "She gave away pieces of you without meaning to. People do that. They leave pieces behind in conversation." He set the photo down and looked at me with a kind of bright patience that felt inhuman. "Here is the exchange," he said. "You stop chasing. You stop asking. You stop making noise. You become careful. In return, you get a key." He lifted the key ring in his hand and let it jingle once, delicate as bells. "A door opens," he said. "A door closes. That's all life is." My mouth tasted like metal. "You're not Gordon," I said, forcing the name out like a blade. His eyes didn't flinch, but the corners of his smile tightened. "Gordon built good doors," he said. Gordon understood them all. He leaned closer until I could smell peppermint and something older beneath it, like damp paper stored too long. "Gordon left himself behind," he whispered. So I used what he left. The desk lamp flickered once, and I realized the light in this room obeyed him the way my phone signal did. like he carried the building's weak points in his pocket. I looked past him at the corkboards, again at the hundreds of names tied with red ribbon, and I saw my mother's name there, and Danny's name there, and then near the center, and my own name, already written, already tagged, as if my presence here was just a formality. He followed my gaze and smiled with satisfaction. "See," he said, "you were always going to sit in the chair." Then from somewhere above us, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of distant cheering, midnight crowds beginning to count down in neighborhoods and bars. 10, 9, 8, muffled through concrete like a heartbeat through a wall. The man in the Santa suit lifted one gloved hand as if blessing the moment. "Happy New Year," he said softly, and the monitor behind him went black. The monitor went black, right as the distant countdown outside hit zero, and the silence that followed felt heavier than the cheering I'd heard through the concrete a moment earlier, like the mall itself had swallowed the new year and decided to keep it. I stayed seated in the torn Santa chair, because my body understood the lesson before my mind could argue in this room movement was a request for consequences. The desk lamp was the only warm light, and even it seemed to breathe, brightening a hair, dimming a hair, like it was listening to it. I couldn't see him for a few seconds, only the faint outline of corkboards crowded with dangling gift tags tied in red ribbon. Hundreds of names suspended like ornaments, and I hated how neat it looked, how holiday pretty it tried to feel. Then he stepped into the edge of the lamp's glow, as calmly as if he'd been standing there the whole time. Santa suit, brushed and composed beard, fluffed hat, straight pale eyes steady on my face. "Don't move too fast," he said, gently, like advice. "You'll leave something behind." My throat tightened around the same question, because repeating it was the only resistance I still recognized. "Where are they?" I said, and my voice sounded thin in the room's soft hum. He didn't answer with words. He lifted a small red ribbon tag between two gloved fingers and turned it so I could read my full name, written in careful black ink, the same pressure, the same tidy handwriting I'd seen on the photos and notes. "This is you," he said, as if introducing me to a file. "This is what you become when you stop being careful." Before I could jerk away, he looped the ribbon around my wrist and tied it with a neat little knot, snug enough that I felt it press against my pulse, soft enough to feel like a gift. My stomach turned. I tried to pull free and the ribbon tightened, making my own heartbeat feel trapped. He watched my reaction with calm interest, like he was studying how long it took a person to accept a collar. "Stop," I said, and the word cracked, because it wasn't a command here, it was a plea. He tilted his head, that familiar Santa listening angle that now looked like calculation. "I am stopping," he said. "I'm stopping you from scattering." He gestured toward the corkboards. "Look how many people leave themselves behind. A schedule, a phone number, a habit, a spare key, a dream. You think privacy is a wall, but it's a door people forget to lock." He moved to the desk and smoothed the HR printout I'd brought, as if it were sacred paper. "Your work did most of the collecting for me," he murmured. "You call it employment. I call it permission." I swallowed hard and forced my eyes away from the tags, because I knew what I'd see. And of course, I saw them. Anyway, my mother's name pinned high, Danny's name pinned close by, both tied with the same red ribbon, both hanging in that neat, humiliating display. My breath stuttered. "Let them go," I said, and the sentence felt too small to hold what I meant. He didn't flinch. Instead, he reached to the wall and flicked a switch I hadn't noticed. A second light came on behind a glass panel on the far wall, revealing a narrow, adjacent room like an observation booth. My mother sat in there upright on a chair, hands folded tinsel wrapped around her wrists like decoration. Eyes open but distant, as if she'd been taught to be still. The sight of her knocked the air out of me. "Mom," I whispered without meaning to, and his gloved hand lifted palm out, almost polite. "No," he said softly. "If you speak, you make her pay." He didn't raise his voice, didn't rush, didn't need to. In the booth, my mother's shoulders twitched, as if someone had stepped closer to her from the blind spot, and my own voice died in my throat. He watched me swallow the sound and nodded once satisfied. See, he said, that's careful. My hands clenched until my nails bit skin. What do you want? I asked, because it was the only question that mattered, and the only one he seemed to enjoy. His smile widened a fraction, pleased by the obedience of the question itself. Exchange, he said. You leave me alone, and I return what you miss. That's not an exchange, I snapped, the anger finally leaking out. That's blackmail. He shrugged, like names were irrelevant. Only doors matter, he replied. He walked to a filing cabinet and pulled out a thick manila folder. The tab read Gordon Pritchard in block letters, and beneath it, smaller incident. He laid the contents out, like he was teaching me a lesson. A faded ID photo of a man in a maintenance uniform, a form with dates and signatures, a grainy corridor still, and a laminated lower-level map of the mall with certain routes, highlighted in bright marker. Gordon built good doors, he said, almost fondly. Gordon understood where people don't look. Gordon left things behind. He tapped the map, so I used what he dropped. The way he said it made my stomach twist, like identity was something you could pick up off the floor. He slid the folder toward me across the desk, the gesture unnervingly normal, like a manager passing paperwork. You want the world to believe you, he said. You want something that fits inside their forms. Take a piece that looks official. My fingers hovered near the folder, and I hated myself for it, but evidence was a language the outside world spoke, and he knew it. He watched my hesitation and smiled, as if he could see the gears turning in me, the part that wanted to survive by being understood. Good, he said. See how easily you take what you want when you're desperate. You're not different. You just tell yourself better stories. I looked past him at my mother behind glass, and felt rage like heat with nowhere to go. Danny, I said, forcing the name through clenched teeth. He plucked Danny's tag from the corkboard with 2 fingers and held it up like a delicate ornament. She talked, he said softly. Now she's learning to be quiet. Quiet keeps people. He pinned it back with neat care and turned to me again, as if the conversation was still gentle. Here is what you do, he said. You stop writing reports. You stop asking questions. You quit the kiosk. You don't call the security chief. You don't answer detectives. You become careful in the way. I shook my head, and he didn't argue because he didn't need to. His gloved hand lifted a remote from the desk, and even though the monitor was black, I felt the implied click like a gun cocking. My mother's shoulders twitched again behind the glass, and my body understood the leverage instantly. My protest collapsed into silence. He nodded, pleased. Careful, he repeated, as if it were a prayer. Then he separated a single key from the ring in his hand and placed it on the desk in front of me. A cheap silver tag hung from it, with a small printed letter B. I stared at it until my eyes burned. Basement, I whispered, and he smiled without confirming. It opens something you keep locked, he said. Take it. I reached out and picked it up because he had made every other choice dangerous, and the key was warm as if it had been held against skin. He stepped back, giving me space like a host after handing a guest their coat. Now you will take Gordon's folder, and you will leave, he said. I grabbed the folder with fingers that didn't feel like mine. The door behind me clicked, unlocking, as if the room itself had decided I was allowed to go. As I stood, the red ribbon on my wrist caught the lamplight like a bright warning. One more thing, he added, calm as ever. Don't look for the girl tonight. Not unless you want to learn what missing really means. I walked out into the lower corridor on legs that felt borrowed, and as soon as I crossed the threshold, my phone buzzed in my pocket like a leash tightening. A message from the unknown, number only 2 words. Be careful. Behind me through the sealed wall, I heard it again, soft, rhythmic, patient, the clicking of a latch being tested from the other side, like the building itself was practicing how to open for him. My phone had full bars the second I hit the stairwell, like the mall had decided the performance was over and allowed me back into the normal world. And that sudden normality made my stomach turn because it meant the loss of signal had never been an accident. I drove home with Gordon's folder on the passenger seat and the key marked B, clenched in my fist hard enough to leave an imprint. and all the while, the red ribbon on my wrist flashed under streetlights, like a shameful bracelet I couldn't stop staring at. I kept checking my mirrors, not because I expected a car tailing me, but because I'd learned he didn't need a car. He needed only the spaces people stopped watching. At a red light, my phone buzzed with a new message from the unknown number, and I felt dread before I even unlocked it. "Don't waste the gift," it said, and beneath it was a photo taken from inside my car from the back seat, showing the back of my head and the key in my hand, the angle close enough to mean someone had been there while I was driving. I whipped around, heart slamming, and the back seat was empty, but the windows were faintly fogged at the edges, as if warm breath had been near them. I sat through the green light, because my hands wouldn't move, then forced myself forward and didn't stop again until I was in my driveway. The house looked unchanged, porch light steady, blinds closed, Christmas lights still blinking with that stupid cheerful rhythm, and the normalness felt staged like a set reset between scenes. I sat in my car for a full minute, listening, because after everything, silence sounded less like peace and more like something holding its breath. When I finally went inside, the front door was locked, the chain in place, no signs of forced entry, and I almost laughed because he'd never needed force. I went straight to the basement door and found the chair I'd wedged under the knob earlier, shifted by an inch, angled as if someone had moved it, and then tried to put it back, exactly failing just enough to leave a fingerprint. That inch made my skin crawl. I turned on every light in the stairwell and stood at the top step, listening. No clicking, no voice, only the furnace in the house settling, but I could feel the memory of that crawl space, like a cold spot in my head. I brought the key up to the basement door lock, telling myself the letter B had to mean something, and the key slid in smoothly, too smoothly, like it belonged there. And when I turned it, the lock gave with a soft internal click. It sounded less like a mechanism yielding, and more like a latch deciding to cooperate. The door opened a fraction on its own, and cold air breathed out, smelling faintly of peppermint and damp cardboard. I forced myself down the stairs and flicked the basement lights on. The bulbs buzzed, then stabilized, revealing my basement exactly as it had always been. Boxes, old decorations, the treadmill, except for a new arrangement in the center of the floor. A perfect circle of Christmas lights plugged into an outlet. He hadn't noticed glowing steadily, and inside that circle sat Donnie's purse, opened its contents, sorted neatly as if someone had emptied it and then decided to make it presentable. On top of the purse lay a gift tag, tied with red ribbon, and even before I read it, my throat tightened because I knew the handwriting. "Listen," it said. My phone buzzed again with a text that made my stomach drop. "You wanted them here, so I brought them home." I spun slowly, scanning the corners, the shadows between stacked bins, the dark gap under the stairs, expecting a movement. A red sleeve, pale eyes in the dark, but there was nothing, and the emptiness felt intentional, like he wanted the room to make me imagine him in every possible place at once. I untied the tag with trembling fingers and found a folded sheet of thick cardstock beneath it. I opened it and froze. It was a printed map of my house, sketched with unsettling accuracy. Rooms, doors, vents, even the crawl space route under the basement, and a bold circle drawn around the basement. A small arrow pointed to the wall, where the furnace vent connected, and beside it, in neat handwriting, were 3 words that made my skin go cold. "This is mine." The basement light flickered once, and in the sudden dim bright pulse, I heard a soft creak above me in the living room, like someone shifting their weight on the floorboards. Then, another creak closer to the kitchen door. My instinct screamed to run outside to the neighbors, to any place with witnesses, but my body remembered the observation booth, remembered my mother's shoulders twitching when I spoke, and fear tightened around my throat like the red ribbon on my wrist. "Mom," I whispered, anyway, unable to stop myself, and the word broke halfway. From upstairs, calm and close, a voice answered as if he were in the next room of a normal house. "Careful," he said. "That's how you lose things." I backed toward the basement stairs, keeping my eyes on the dark opening above, and my heel bumped a storage bin with a dull plastic thud that sounded deafening in the basement's quiet. I flinched, and the voice upstairs made a soft sound. Not laughter, exactly more like pleased acknowledgement. "You see," he murmured, "you're always dropping parts of yourself." I climbed the stairs, slowly, refusing to sprint, refusing to make the panic noise he wanted. And at the top, I stepped into the kitchen to find it empty, spotless, too clean, as if someone had wiped every surface again to erase proof. On the kitchen table, centered like a place setting, sat Gordon's folder, as if I had already placed it there. Beside it were 3 gift tags tied together, with red ribbon, my mother's name, Danny's name, and mine. Under them was a 4th tag, blank, and a pen laid neatly across it like a gift. My hands went numb. The message wasn't written in ink. It was written in arrangement, in the quiet demand of a blank line waiting to be filled. My phone vibrated with one more text from the unknown number. Leave a name and a door opens. I stared at the blank tag and understood the real exchange wasn't silence, or quitting my job, or ignoring detectives. It was participation. He wanted the moment my hand wrote someone else into his system, the moment I became part of how he kept people. The house was quiet, but it wasn't empty. It felt like it was listening through vents and walls, patient as that clicking latch, waiting to see whether I would trade somebody else's name for the chance to get mine back. I held the pen above the blank gift tag and realized the real horror wasn't that he could break into my home. It was that he could make my hand the tool that finished the breaking. The kitchen was spotless, in that unnerving way that no lived-in room ever is, and the 3 tags tied together on the table, my mother's name, Danny's name, my name, looked like party favors someone had prepared for guests who would never arrive. The blank tag sat beneath them like an open mouth. My phone buzzed once, then again, and I didn't need to look to know it would be the unknown number. The same calm insistence translated into text. Leave a name, and the door opens. I stared at the words until my eyes burned because they offered the one thing my body craved more than justice and action. A lever. A step that wasn't just waiting. I could feel the red ribbon on my wrist pressing against my pulse, soft as velvet, firm as a warning, and I thought about my mother's shoulders twitching behind glass when I spoke too loudly, the way he could punish without touching the way consequences traveled through walls. My fingers tightened around the pen until it trembled. My first instinct was to write a fake name, some invented stranger, to see if the system was real, but even that felt like leaving a person behind on purpose, and I could not live with the possibility that my curiosity would become someone else's tag on his corkboard. My second instinct was worse, to write the name of someone I knew, someone with access, the security chief, the detective, anyone who might help me, because the cruel logic of desperation whispers that sacrificing one might save 2. I set the pen down hard enough to make a small click, and my whole body flinched at the sound, waiting for the creak upstairs, waiting for the calm voice to correct me. Nothing happened. The silence pressed closer, as if the house itself was listening. I looked at Gordon's folder on the table, the incident tab, the laminated mall map, the paperwork that felt official enough to make the world believe me, and I finally understood what he'd offered me in that office. It wasn't mercy, it was bait. Evidence as a leash. If I ran to the police with it, he would tighten the ribbon around my life until I couldn't breathe. If I didn't, I would rot in the quiet, he demanded. My eyes dropped to the cheap silver key with the letter B lying beside the tags, like a promise. It opens something you keep locked, he had said, and I had thought he meant my basement door, like a threat. But the way the key fit that lock so perfectly told me something worse. The lock had been waiting for that key, which meant the door, thought I controlled, had never been mine. I slid the blank tag closer and picked up the pen again, not because I wanted to obey, but because I needed to turn his ritual into a tool. I thought about the name he wore, like a mask. Gordon Pritchard. Dead, according to staffing. A badge that shouldn't ping doors, according to security. An accident file thick enough to have a smell when you opened it. If the system demanded a name, then the safest name to give it was the one he already used, the one already soaked into his corridors, the one already printed on logs and drawers and maps. I wrote Gordon Pritchard on the blank tag in block letters, my hand shaking, and the instant the ink dried, something inside the house answered. It wasn't a voice at first. It was a sound, soft, internal, mechanical, like a latch deciding to move. The basement light flickered once, then stabilized. The air in the kitchen changed a faint, cold draft, sliding along the floor as if a door somewhere had unsealed. My phone buzzed again with a single message. Good. I didn't wait. I grabbed my mother's phone, Gordon's folder, and the key, and I moved like my life depended on leaving as little behind as possible because I could feel him listening for panic. At the basement door, the chair I'd wedged under the knob had been moved again, not shoved aside, but placed neatly against the wall like a correction, and rage flared hot in my throat because even my barricades were being treated like clutter, to be tidied. I unlocked the door with the key B, and went down into the basement with every light on my shadow, sharp on the concrete. The circle of Christmas lights still glowed in the center surrounding Danny's purse like an altar, and I hated how festive it looked, how he insisted on rapping terror in holiday language. I stepped past it, following the printed map in my mind, toward the furnace wall where the crawl space vent connected. The vent cover that had been screwed in neatly was now slightly ajar, one corner lifted as if someone had loosened it from the inside. The draft coming from it carried that faint peppermint and damp cardboard smell that had become his signature. I crouched and pulled the cover free, and the darkness beyond it felt deeper than any crawl space should, like it wasn't just under my house, but under my life. I aimed my phone flashlight inside, and saw something I hadn't seen before. A narrow-framed opening with a metal edge, not raw dirt and beams, but a constructed passage, like a service tunnel someone had built, and then hidden behind domestic drywall. Along the floor of that opening ran a thin line of silver glitter, stubborn and deliberate, like a trail he expected me to follow. I crawled in far enough for the cold metal to press into my elbows, and the sound of my own breathing seemed too loud a thing that could be punished. The tunnel angled slightly, and then widened into a small concrete room, lit by a single hanging bulb. The room was clean, in the same unsettling way my kitchen had been, and along one wall were hooks, holding a red Santa coat, a hat, a beard, and a pair of gloves hung with the care of someone putting away a uniform after a shift. On the opposite wall was a corkboard covered in gift tags, and my stomach dropped when I saw familiar handwriting. In the center of the room, on a folding chair, sat Danny. She was alive. Her eyes lifted to mine, instantly wet and furious, and her mouth was covered with a strip of silver duct tape. Her hands were bound with red ribbon, the same soft, velvet-looking kind, tied into neat little bows that made the restraint feel like decoration. She shook her head hard, warning me, pleading, and I moved to her without thinking, ripping the tape away gently, my fingers trembling. She sucked in air like she'd been underwater. "He's here," she whispered, voice raw. "He's always here. Where's my mom?" I whispered back, and Danny's eyes flicked to the far corner, where a second door sat flush with the wall, painted the same color as concrete, almost invisible if you weren't looking for it. There was a keypad on that door, and a small green light above it, steady, waiting. The moment I saw the keypad, my blood turned to ice, because it meant this wasn't just a hiding place. It was an office, a controlled room, a door that could open or not open depending on a signal. I reached for the keypad, and Danny grabbed my wrist hard enough to hurt. "Don't," she whispered. "That's what he wants. That's the door." I stared at the green light, hearing his words in my head leave a name. And a door opens, and understood the twist. The name I'd written hadn't freed them. It had opened me. It had turned my basement into his hallway. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. A photo attachment. I didn't want to look, but Danny's grip tightened as if she could feel my fear through skin. I opened it, and my stomach dropped. It was a live photo, freshly taken from above the tunnel entrance, showing my basement stairwell and the circle of Christmas lights, and standing just outside the ring, a Santa silhouette in the shadows, head tilted, as if listening. Under the photo, one line, "You came through the right door." The hanging bulb above us swung slightly, and in that motion I heard something else, faint, rhythmic, patient, the clicking of a latch on the other side of the hidden door, like someone testing it from within. Danny's voice dropped to a tremor. "He can lock us in," she whispered. "He can lock you in." I grabbed the red ribbon tack still tied around my wrist and yanked until the knot tightened painfully. And in that flash of pain, I understood the only advantage I had left. He loved neatness. He loved systems. He loved doors that behaved. So I did the one messy thing he wouldn't expect. I pulled Gordon's folder from my bag and dumped it on the concrete floor papers, scattering laminated map, sliding away the incident tab bending. The sound was loud, ugly, human. The clicking on the hidden door stopped immediately. In the sudden silence, a calm voice spoke from somewhere beyond the wall, close enough to feel soft, as if he were right beside my ear. "Careless," he said, almost disappointed. I didn't answer. I ripped the laminated mall map in half with shaking hands and shoved the torn pieces into the tunnel entrance, wedging them like a crude blocker, where the metal frame met the passage, anything to create friction in his tidy world. Then I grabbed Danny's ribbon ties and tore them loose, not untying, tearing, making frayed ends. Danny flinched at the roughness, but stood, and the two of us crawled back into the tunnel on our hands and knees, dragging the mess behind us like a shield. Above in my basement, something shifted, a soft creak of floorboards, and Danny whispered, "Don't look up," as if looking would make it real. We crawled, and my lungs burned, and the tunnel behind us made a faint scraping sound, like fabric sliding along metal. When we burst back into the basement, the circle of Christmas lights still glowed, and for a heartbeat, the room looked empty, normal. And then I saw a red glove resting on the edge of the circle, palm up, fingers curled in that slow beckoning gesture, as if he'd been there seconds ago and had stepped away, just out of sight. My phone buzzed one last time with a single message that made my stomach drop lower than fear should allow. "You open the door. Now you have to close it." We didn't run out the front door like normal people, because normal exits didn't feel real anymore. We ran into the cold night through the back, cutting across yards, hopping fences, the kind of frantic movement that makes dogs bark and porch lights flick on, and every bark felt like a flare that might either save us or guide him. Danny kept glancing behind us, not for a person but for the absence of one, because by then we'd learned he moved through places. The way a draft moves felt more than seen. I got us to my neighbor's porch and pounded on the door until my knuckles split, and when the neighbor opened it in sleepy confusion, I tried to explain without sounding insane. Someone had been in my house. My mother was missing. Danny had been held under my basement. We needed a phone that wasn't mine, the line he couldn't pinch. The neighbor's face changed when she saw the blood on my knuckles and the duct tape residue on Danny's mouth, and she called 911 without asking for a better story. When police arrived, they treated us differently now. Because Danny was a body, they could see a witness who didn't live inside my head, and that shift was both relief and rage, because it meant truth mattered only when it had bruises. They came into my house with more officers, more flashlights, more urgency, and I stood on my porch shaking while they went down into the basement. I listened for the shout that would mean they'd found him, listened for the calm voice that would mean he wanted them to hear, and for a few minutes there was nothing but radio chatter and boots on the stairs. Then an officer called out that they'd found a concealed vent opening and an alteration to the foundation, and I felt my knees go weak, because hearing it in official language made it more terrifying, not less. They pulled the vent cover, crawled into the tunnel with tactical flashlights, and I watched the mouths of the officers when they emerged, tight, angry, disoriented. They said the passage was reinforced with metal framing leading to a small concrete room. They said the room had hooks, with a Santa suit hung neatly like a uniform. They said there was a corkboard with dozens of gift tags, names and numbers and notes. They said there was a second door with a keypad that they couldn't force because it was integrated into an electrical control panel they didn't want to trigger blindly. They said in the careful tone people use when they're trying not to scare you, more than necessary, that whoever built it knew what he was doing. The detective arrived, took one look at Danny, and stopped treating me like a panicked kid. He asked Danny to tell her story, and she did, voice shaking, but clear the parking lot, like the Santa silhouette, the way her phone lost service. The moment she'd been grabbed from behind by someone who smelled like peppermint and coffee. Duct tape, The forced quiet, the rules. He didn't hit me, she said, and that sentence made the detective's face tighten because it meant the violence was deliberate, controlled, designed to leave little that a courtroom could hold. He talked like a manager, Danny added, and I felt my stomach drop because that was exactly right. He spoke like someone used to being obeyed. The detective asked if she'd seen his face. Danny shook her head. The beard looked real, she whispered. But I never saw skin. He kept the lights low. He kept me facing forward. Then she said something that turned my blood to ice. He kept saying he was going to return me, she murmured, like I was something borrowed. When the officers finally approached the keypad door, they brought an electrician and a portable power isolator. They cut power to the panel in controlled steps. The basement lights in my house flickered as collateral, and in that flicker I felt a sick certainty that he was listening through the wiring, that every switch was a nerve. The detective ordered them to breach the keypad door anyway. They pried the frame, worked the hinges, and the moment the seal broke, a wave of cold air rushed out, carrying that peppermint and damp cardboard smell so strong it made Danny gag. The door swung inward to reveal a larger room beyond darker, deeper, like a pocket the house shouldn't have had. Inside were more folding chairs, more corkboards, more hooks with spare costumes, Santa coats, beards, hats, even elf vests, like a wardrobe for a role that could be recast. Along one wall were monitors, mounted in a row, most of them dark, one of them faintly lit with static, and on a desk beneath them sat a mug, my mother's mug, filled with cold black coffee. My throat closed. The detective stepped forward, flashlight beam cutting across the room, and the light caught something on the far wall that made everyone go. Still a line of gift tags pinned in neat columns, and among them, in the same careful handwriting, was my mother's full name circled. Where is she? I choked out, and the detective held up a hand to stop me from stepping closer, but his own voice was tight now. They searched that room thoroughly, cabinets behind monitors, under a false floor panel that hid a shallow compartment full of phones with SIM cards removed, a box of spare keys tagged with letters, and a stack of printed employee schedules from different businesses in town, like he collected accents, the way some people collect stamps. They found Danny's tag. They found mine. They did not find my mother, and that absence felt like he was laughing at us from somewhere just out of sight. The detective swore quietly, then ordered a sweep of the tunnel network, because the hidden rooms suggested other rooms, other doors. They crawled deeper, following the metal framing beneath my foundation, until it veered toward the side yard, and then unexpectedly toward the street, as if the tunnel had been designed to connect not only to my house, but to other points in the neighborhood. One officer emerged from the crawl space hours later with a handful of silver glitter on his glove and said, "It keeps going." The phrase landed like a verdict. The system wasn't a single hideout. It was a route, a set of doors. By dawn, the police had sealed my home as a crime scene, and I sat on my neighbor's couch, wrapped in a borrowed blanket, while Danny drank water in small, shaking sips. My phone sitting on the coffee table buzzed, despite the detective taking it earlier to preserve evidence. The screen lit up with unknown number, as if the device itself still belonged to him. I grabbed it before anyone could stop me, because panic and hope are siblings. The message contained one photo and one line. The photo showed my mother sitting upright again, hands folded, eyes open but distant, and behind her was a wall sign I recognized from the mall. Electrical room authorized personnel, only. The line beneath the photo was neat, almost polite. "You brought me witnesses. Thank you." Then a second message arrived immediately after, and this one made my blood run colder than fear. "You closed one door. I have many." In the corner of the photo, barely visible, was a red ribbon tag dangling from someone's gloved hand, and on that tag I could read a new name, being written in fresh ink, a name I recognized instantly because it belonged to my neighbor, woman who had called 911 for us. My throat went tight, and I finally understood the trap's full shape. He didn't just want silence. He wanted to teach me that asking for help was another way of leaving people behind. The first time I saw my neighbor's name written in that careful handwriting, it wasn't on a screen in some hidden room. It was on my phone in my shaking hand, while a detective stood a few feet away pretending he didn't see me fall apart. The message had landed like a polite, "Thank you, you brought me witnesses," followed by the photo of my mother under a mall sign that said, "Electrical room authorized, personnel only," and then the final cruelty, a red ribbon tag held in a card. Gloved hand with my neighbor's name being written in fresh ink, the pen tip still touching paper. I stared at it until the letters stopped looking like letters and started looking like a door clicking shut. The detective took the phone from me, and for once he didn't ask me if I was sure. He didn't tell me to calm down. He turned and started issuing orders into his radio with a sharpness I hadn't heard before. The kind of sharpness that means the case has moved from hypothetical to personal. Patrol units were dispatched to my neighbor's address, and I tried to breathe like a normal person, while Danny sat beside me on the couch, with her hands wrapped around a cup of water she kept forgetting to drink. The neighbor, the woman who had opened her door half asleep and called 911 without demanding a better story, was now a target because she had done the simplest, decent thing. That was the new lesson he wanted me to learn. Help is a footprint. Footprints lead to doors. When we arrived at her house, it looked ordinary, in the cruelest way. Porch light on blinds drawn a few leftover holiday decorations, still clinging to the railing like someone hadn't had the heart to take them down. Squad cars, line the curb with lights off, to keep the street calm, officers moving, with that careful urgency that tries to look like routine. The detective knocked, announced, waited, knocked again. No answer. My throat tightened. He motioned for an officer to check the side gate, and another went to the back. For a moment, the whole scene was silent, except for the distant rumble of traffic and the soft crack of someone's radio. Then the front door opened a few inches, chain still on, and my neighbor's face appeared in the gap, confused and irritated, and very much alive. The relief that flooded me was so intense, it made my eyes sting, and then the relief curdled into guilt, because I knew relief was temporary in a world where he could stand behind a window and make your phone go dead. The detective spoke gently, explained without fully explaining, and asked to come inside. My neighbor looked at me, then at Danny's split lip and duct tape residue, and the confusion fell away into something tighter. She unhooked the chain and let them in. The house smelled like sleep and coffee and leftover sugar cookies, a normal smell that felt obscene against the idea that her name had already been tagged. Officers walked through rooms, checked locks, checked windows, checked the basement door. The detective asked her where she kept spare keys, whether anyone had done maintenance recently, whether she'd noticed anything strange since the holidays. My neighbor laughed, once a defensive sound. Strange, like what she asked, and then she stopped laughing when she saw the detective's face. I wanted to tell her everything in one breath, about the mall, the Santa suit, the maintenance badge, the hidden tunnel under my foundation, but my tongue felt heavy because every time I spoke the truth out loud, someone else became part of the story. I watched the officers move through her home and understood the irony. She was only safe right now because she had police in her living room, and the only reason police were in her living room was because my fear had become contagious. The detective asked her to sit at the kitchen table, and he told her plainly that someone had targeted her name, that she should not be alone, that she should stay with family if possible, that she should let officers escort her if she needed to leave. My neighbor stared at him like he'd begun speaking a foreign language, and I saw the exact moment her mind tried to convert this into something smaller. Pranks, misunderstandings, maybe a neighborhood burglar, and failed. Then her phone chimed. She glanced down, frowned, and said, "That's weird." The detective asked what. My neighbor swallowed. "My phone says no service," she whispered, eyes widening. Inside a house filled with police radios and flashlights, an authority her phone had dropped to nothing, a small, quiet absence that made the room suddenly feel less secure. The detective's posture changed immediately. Officers stopped moving. Everyone listened, not for a sound, but for the lack of one. Then from the living room, the Christmas light she'd left up blinked once and went out entirely, as if someone had flipped a switch. My neighbor's breath hitched. "I didn't," she started, and then the front doorbell rang. One clean chime. We all froze. The detective gestured, and an officer moved toward the door with his hand near his holster, not drawn, but ready. The bell rang, again, slower, patient. The officer peered through the peephole, then stepped back, face tightening. "There's a Santa on the porch," he said, voice low, as if naming it would make it real. My neighbor made a small choking sound. Danny's fingers dug into my wrist. I felt my stomach drop into the floor. The detective approached the door and called out through it, controlled and loud enough to be heard. "Police," he said. "Step away from the door." Silence. Then a voice came through the wood, muffled but calm like customer service. "I'm sorry," it said. "I think I have the wrong house." The voice was the same voice I'd heard in my basement, the same calm tone that made threats sound like advice. The detective nodded at the officer. The officer yanked the door open fast, flashlight beam cutting the porch, but there was nobody there. No red suit, no boots, no beard. Only the cold air and the neighbor's porch decorations swaying slightly, as if someone had brushed past them. The officer stepped out, scanning, and his flashlight caught a single red ribbon tag lying on the doormat, placed neatly in the center like a tip. The detective picked it up with gloved fingers and turned it over. On the front, in that careful handwriting, was my neighbor's name. On the back, "Thank you for opening." My neighbor's face drained of color. "I didn't open," she whispered, voice cracking. Danny made a small sound of panic. The detective's jaw tightened hard, and for the first time I saw anger in him that wasn't procedural. He ordered officers to search the yard, the street, the adjacent properties. They moved quickly, but it didn't matter, because the point was never the porch. The point was the message he could show up under a costume that should have looked ridiculous on December 28th, and he could leave without being seen, and he could do it while police stood in the hallway. Then my neighbor's eyes flicked toward her coat rack and her hand flew to her mouth. "My keys," she whispered. My keys were there. She pointed to an empty hook. The detective asked her to describe the keychain, and as she spoke, my phone buzzed in the detective's hand. He looked down and his face tightened. He turned the screen so I could see. A new photo taken from somewhere inside my neighbor's house showed the coat rack in the entryway and the empty hook, and in the lower corner, the edge of a red sleeve blurred as if it had just moved out of frame. Under the photo, "You leave things behind." The detective didn't hesitate now. He told my neighbor to gather essentials, not to pack, not to linger. He assigned officers to escort her out immediately. She moved like a person in a dream, grabbing a purse, a jacket, shoes with trembling hands. As she stepped over her own threshold with police around her, I saw it on the floor just inside the doorway where it hadn't been before. A small circle of silver glitter, thin and deliberate, like a signature he wanted me to recognize. I felt sick. He had been inside, while we were all looking outward. That was his favorite lesson, the one he kept teaching. Doors don't just open to let something in. They open to let your attention out. The detective ushered us back to the cars, radioing for units at the mall, because my mother's photo had been under an electrical room sign, and he refused to ignore it now. As we drove away, I looked back at my neighbor's house and saw her porch light flicker, once, twice, then stabilize, and I imagined him in the dark inside, adjusting something with neat hands, smiling at how easily he'd turned a good deed into a new target. My phone buzzed again, even though it wasn't in my hand, and I heard the detective inhale sharply. He didn't show me the screen this time. He just said under his breath, "He's enjoying this." And in that sentence I heard the truth that made everything worse. He wasn't running from us. He was guiding us, one open door at a time. By the time we reached the mall, it was already daylight, and daylight should have made me feel safer, but instead it made everything feel more humiliating, like the world was bright enough to see my fear clearly, and still refused to understand it. The detective had escalated the case, calling in additional units and requesting corporate cooperation on access locks, and for once the mall complied without arguing, because missing employees and compromised infrastructure looked bad on paper. We entered through a service entrance and moved as a group through corridors that smelled like dust and stale cinnamon radios, crackling boots on concrete. And the building's emptiness made every sound feel louder than it should have. The detective didn't let me wander. He kept me close, not because he trusted me, but because he understood I was bait, whether I wanted to be or not. Danny stayed with an officer near the security office, wrapped in a blanket, eyes hollow because she'd already been inside his system, and she looked like she couldn't survive another door. The head of mall security met us with a tablet full of logs, and a face that had aged overnight. He led us toward the electrical rooms, explaining that there were multiple, some locked behind updated keypads, some behind older mechanical locks, and that the badge ping tied to Gordon's old ID had hit one of them during the window when my mother's photo had been sent. Sent, the detective repeated, tasting the word like a problem. He wanted to say taken, but he couldn't prove taken. We stopped at a grey door with bold signage, electrical room, authorized personnel only. The sign looked exactly like the one in my mother's photo, and my throat tightened around the urge to call out her name. An electrician accompanied us, and with corporate approval and law enforcement authority, they cut power carefully and breached the door. The air that rolled out was cold and stale, not peppermint this time, and that almost made it worse because it meant he could change his signature when he wanted. The flashlight beam swept over panels, conduit warning labels, and the room looked like a normal electrical room, the kind of place nobody thinks about until something breaks. Then an officer's light caught something small on the floor near the back wall, a red ribbon tag, perfectly placed, as if someone had set it down and stepped away. The detective picked it up with gloved fingers. The front was blank. The back contained one line in neat handwriting. Wrong door. The detective's jaw tightened. He wants us to chase, he said, and the head of security swallowed hard as if he'd just realized the building had become a maze designed by someone else. They checked the room anyway, every panel, every corner, every ceiling tile, and found nothing but electricity and dust. The detective ordered a sweep of adjacent electrical rooms. Same result. Normal infrastructure, no mother. The only consistent thing was the tags, little red ribbon punctuation marks, telling us we were always one step behind. As they searched, my phone returned to me, only because it was now evidence in motion, buzzed softly. Unknown number. For a moment I couldn't make myself look because looking felt like opening a door with my eyes. Then I saw the preview, and my stomach dropped. It was a voicemail notification from my mother's number. I froze so hard my knees locked. The detective noticed immediately and held out his hand. I handed him the phone. He put it on speaker, and in the bright, sterile hallway of a mall service corridor, with officers standing around and radios humming, we listened to my mother's voicemail as if it were a recording from a different world. At first it was just breathing slow and close to the microphone, and then a calm voice spoke low and gentle. Not my mother's. "You're doing well," it said. "You're bringing more people, more eyes. That's very brave." The detective's face tightened. The voice continued unhurried. "But brave isn't careful," it said. "Careful keeps people." Then faintly in the background I heard a sound that made my skin go cold. A soft tapping like a fingertip against glass, and behind that tapping so faint it could have been imagination. A woman's shallow breath, tight with fear. The calm voice spoke again, closer now, like it was leaning into the mic. "If you want her," it said, "stop opening doors for strangers." The message ended with a soft click. For a second, nobody spoke. The detective looked at me, and I saw in his eyes the same furious helplessness I'd been living with for days, evidence that proved nothing in court but everything in the gut. He turned to the head of security and demanded a full map of lower-level corridors, sealed, renovation routes, any out-of-service areas, anything that could connect to electrical rooms without showing up on customer cameras. The head of security nodded too fast, and I watched the color drain from his face as he said quietly, "There's an old corridor we never reopened after the incident." The detective asked him to take us there. We walked deeper into the back of house, past storage and mechanical rooms until the fluorescent lights spaced out and the air felt colder. We stopped at a section of wall that looked normal, except for a faint seam where paint didn't match. The head of security pointed to it. Behind this, he said, voice low as the sealed corridor. He explained that after Gordon's accident, corporate had sealed portions of the route because it had been deemed unsafe, and then renovations had layered over it until it became more roomed in place. The detective ordered the seam breached. Maintenance brought tools. Officers positioned. The sound of prying metal against wall echoed down the corridor like a scream trapped in a throat. When the panel finally gave a thin breath of air, exhaled from the darkness behind it, colder than the hall, carrying a faint hint of peppermint that made my stomach twist because it meant he was close enough to mock us. Flashlights cut into the space beyond, revealing a narrow corridor lined with old conduit and dust, the kind of place the mall had tried to forget. And there on the floor, just inside the opening, was a perfect circle of silver glitter, thin and deliberate like a ritual mark. In the center of that circle sat a small red gift bag, the kind you'd hand a child at a party. The detective motioned for an officer to retrieve it carefully. Inside was a single glossy photo in a clear sleeve. My mother seated upright, hands, folded eyes open but distant, and behind her close enough to feel like a hand on her shoulder, the edge of a red sleeve and a pale blue eye staring straight into the lens. On the back in neat handwriting, "You found the hallway. Now you have to choose which way to walk." The detective swore under his breath and ordered the corridor cleared, step by step, but even as officers moved in, my phone vibrated again in my pocket, like a heartbeat I didn't control. Unknown number. One sentence. "Don't bring them next time." I felt the red ribbon on my wrist tighten against my pulse, as if the knot had pulled itself, and when I looked down, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Another knot, smaller, newly tied into the ribbon's tail, as neat and deliberate as a concept. Gift, bow. I hadn't tied it. I hadn't even touched the ribbon since the night in his office. The only way it could be there was if he had been close enough to my body to change it without waking my awareness. And that realization made daylight feel meaningless, because it meant he didn't need darkness to reach me. He only needed me to keep walking through the doors he had already arranged. The sealed corridor smelled like wet concrete and old wiring, the kind of smell you only notice in places built to be forgotten. And the moment the first flashlight beam cut into it, I saw how perfectly he understood human attention. Every officer leaned forward to look. Every radio went quiet, every body tightened toward the dark, and that collective focus left the bright hallway behind us, feeling suddenly unguarded, like an open door no one remembered to close. The detective ordered a slow, methodical sweep, and for once the mall security chief didn't argue. He looked like a man watching his own building become an accomplice. We moved in a tight line, boots, scuffing dust beams, sliding across conduit and peeling paint, and I kept feeling the red ribbon on my wrist like a pulse you could grab. The small extra knot in the ribbon's tail sat there like proof of a touch I hadn't felt, and it made me keep glancing at the edges of the light, expecting a red sleeve in my peripheral vision. 10 feet in the corridor, split around a thick support column, 2 narrow routes curving out of sight, and I remembered the note on the photo. You have to choose which way to walk. The detective didn't like choices he couldn't control. He pointed left, sent 2 officers right, and I opened my mouth to protest, then closed it. Because the last time I spoke too loudly, my mother's shoulders twitched behind glass. The officers on the right disappeared, around the bend, their light fading to a pale glow on the wall, and for a few seconds everything was just movement and dust and radio nuns. Then the power in the corridor flickered once, not a full outage, just a stutter of brightness like a heartbeat skipping, and in that stutter my phone dropped to no service so fast it felt like my hand had been cut off. Danny, sitting under an officer's watch back in the brighter hall, wasn't with us, but I still heard her earlier whisper in my head, "He can lock you in." The detective kept moving, jaw set, and the mall security chief muttered something about old circuits. We rounded the column and found a second seam in the wall, a panel that had been painted over, and beneath it a thin circle of silver glitter arranged neatly on the floor like a marker in a game. In the center of the glitter circle sat another red gift bag upright and pristine in the grime like a party favor left in the basement. The detective held up a hand and an evidence tech moved forward carefully. The bag contained a folded paper on mall letterhead. The detective unfolded it and read, without speaking at first, his eyes tracking the lines. Then he handed it to the security chief, who paled because the text was typed like a corporate memo and the final line was handwritten in that calm, careful script I now associated with the tightness in my chest. The typed portion was bland. Maintenance route, temporarily reassigned. Follow posted directional markers. The handwritten line underneath was not bland at all. Left for witnesses, right for returns. The detective's eyes snapped toward the right-hand path, where 2 officers had gone. He keyed his radio voice sharp. Unit 2 status, he said. Static. He repeated it. Static. The mall security chief's radio answered with a brief crackle, and then died, as if the corridor itself swallowed signals. My skin went cold. The detective motioned 2 more officers toward the right-hand route, but I grabbed his sleeve before I could stop myself. He wants you to split, I whispered, and my voice sounded small even to me. The detective looked at my hand on his arm, then at my wrist ribbon, then back at my face, and for the first time, his expression softened into something like reluctant belief, mixed with anger, because belief means you admit you're playing someone else's game. He didn't argue. He sent 1 officer only, not 2, and told the rest to keep moving left. We advanced deeper into the corridor, and the air grew colder, and the wiring on the ceiling looked older, more exposed like the mall's bones. We passed a door marked storage that opened into a small room full of dismantled decorations, fake snow, broken ornaments, a collapsed plastic sleigh, and the sight of those props made my stomach twist because they were the same kind of harmless holiday clutter that had once framed him as a joke. On the far wall of that storage room hung a Santa coat on a hook, not the clean one from his office, but a dirtier one. The white trim grayed, the fabric rubbed raw at the elbows, like it had been worn hard. Beneath it on the floor sat a single red glove palm up, fingers curled in that slow, beckoning gesture, and the gesture felt obscene in a place filled with cops and flashlights, like he was daring the room to acknowledge him. An officer stepped closer and nudged the glove with his boot, and I flinched at the casualness, because touching his props felt like opening his doors. The detective ordered photographs taken, then pushed us forward again, refusing to linger where the offender wanted attention. The corridor narrowed and dipped slightly, and then we reached another grey door with a keypad and a small green indicator light. The green light was steady patient, the same waiting green I'd seen under my house, and my mouth went dry. The detective signaled for the electrician to isolate power again, but before anyone could move, the green light changed to amber, then to red, and the keypad beeped softly as if someone on the other side had pressed a button. We all froze. In that stillness, the calm voice I hated came through the door, muffled but clear, like it was speaking through a customer service window. "You brought too many," it said. The detective raised his voice. "This is law enforcement," he called. "Open the door." "No." A pause then, the voice again gentler, almost amused. "You can't order a door," it said. "A door either opens or it doesn't." The mall security chief swallowed audibly. "Who are you?" the detective demanded. The answer came slowly, as if it didn't matter. "I'm the one who returns what you leave behind," the voice said. "And you leave behind so much." The keypad beeped again, and somewhere behind us in the brighter hallway, an alarm chirped. A soft, distant security alert. Not a full siren, just the kind of chirp that makes staff glance at a panel and assume it's a minor fault. Then the corridor lights dimmed by a fraction, and every flashlight beam seemed suddenly too narrow. My phone vibrated in my pocket despite the "No service" icon, a phantom buzz that made my stomach drop. I pulled it out and saw a new message anyway, because the normal rules were just props in his hands. The message contained a photo, the right-hand corridor, taken from above, showing the 2 officers who had gone that way standing shoulder to shoulder in a cramped section of hall, both aiming flashlights at something off-frame. One officer's posture looked wrong, slumped, as if he'd been startled mid-step. Under the photo, one line, "Right," is for returns, "Left" is for witnesses. Then a second photo arrived immediately after, and my blood turned to ice. It was my neighbor sitting upright, like my mother in earlier pictures, hands folded, eyes open but distant, a red ribbon tied around her wrists in neat bows. Behind her was a wall sign from the mall I recognized, from employee training. "Security, office authorized personnel, only." My throat closed. The detective saw my face and snatched the phone, and the moment he saw the photo, the anger in him hardened into something like Fear not for himself, but for the ordinary person who had called 911 and become a tag because of it. The calm voice behind the keypad door spoke again, as if it could sense our shift. You chose witnesses, it said, so I chose a return. The detective signaled breach immediately, but the keypad door didn't give like a normal door. It stayed shut, as if it belonged to a different building entirely. The electrician began cutting power. The evidence tech stepped back, officers repositioned, and in that tight, frantic choreography, I felt the red ribbon on my wrist tighten sharply, not physically, but in my mind, like a leash yanked. I realized then what his note meant. At the deepest level, he didn't need to win by escaping. He won by forcing choices that created new victims. If we chased the right-hand corridor, we left the keypad door. If we stayed left, we left the officers right. If we brought witnesses, he returned them as targets. The detective finally shouted into the radio network with a new frequency, and a faint response crackled through distant and broken but present. Unit 2 is down, a voice said, strained. Something came out of the ceiling. The message cut off mid-sentence. The mall security chief's face drained of color, and I thought about vents, about crawl spaces, about how he moved, like a draft, through places nobody watches. The detective turned to me, eyes hard. Did he come through your house into here? He demanded, not accusing, just trying to map the impossible. I didn't answer because the answer was in the glitter circles, and the key marked B, and the extra knot on my wrist. The map wasn't only under my foundation, it was under all of us. And as we stood there in the sealed corridor, trapped between two routes, and a door that refused to obey the calm voice behind the wall, whispered one final sentence. So close it felt like breath on my ear. Careful, it said. This is how you leave people behind. The detective made a choice that wasn't about strategy. It was about refusing to be trained. And I saw it in the way his jaw set, as he ordered all units to pull back into the brighter corridor and lock the sealed passage behind us. Not because a lock could stop him, but because he wanted to stop, giving the offender new rooms to stage. We're not chasing him underground, he said, voice clipped. We're controlling exits. We're clearing the building. We're finding civilians. It sounded like the first adult sentence anyone had spoken since my life turned into gift tax. Officers flooded the back of House Roots Mall. Security pulled up every working camera feed that hadn't been corrupted, and corporate sent an IT contractor who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else because some problems it shouldn't be possible in a mall built of glass and drywall. They found the two officers from the right-hand corridor half an hour later, not dead, but shaken, one with a cut on his scalp, both insisting they'd seen a Santa suit move along the ceiling beams above them like a shadow without weight. The official explanation would later be structural access, unidentified suspect. Suspect fled, but the truth in their eyes was simpler. The building had roots, and someone knew them better than the people paid to guard it. They did not find my neighbor. They did not find my mother. The detective set up a command post in the security office, and the cruel irony of that word, security, made me feel sick, because the photo had shown my neighbor under that same sign, sitting like a returned package. Dani sat in a chair by the wall, wrapped in a blanket, and every time a radio crackled, she flinched, as if the sound might turn into duct tape again. The mall security chief handed the detective a printed map of out-of-service corridors and sealed maintenance routes, and as the detective traced lines with a pen, I watched the red ribbon on my wrist, like it might start moving on, its own. The extra knot in the tail sat there neat as a bow, and I kept wondering when he'd tied it, how close he'd been, whether he'd been in my kitchen again while I was in the sealed corridor chasing glitter circles. Then, my phone buzzed, and the screen lit up with a message from the unknown number, even though the detective had ordered all devices collected. The message was short. You closed one hallway. I have many. Attached was a live-looking photo of the mall's Santa set area on the main floor. Dismantled and quiet velvet ropes gone, fake trees stacked, and in the center, placed like a throne in an empty court, was the Santa chair. Sitting in it was my mother, upright hands, folded eyes, open but distant tinsel still on her wrists. The photo angle was from above, like a camera mounted high in the atrium. My breath stopped. If the photo was real, she was in public space, in the open, where any customer might walk past and scream, and yet the image carried no panic, no crowd, only stillness, as if the mall itself had been cleared like a stage. The detective grabbed his radio and barked orders units to the main floor. Locked down entrances, clear customers. But before anyone could move, a second photo arrived. My mother still in the chair, but now a red-sleeved figure stood behind. Her one gloved hand resting lightly on her shoulder, the other holding a gift tag toward the lens. On the tag was written one word, quiet. The detective didn't hesitate. He ran. Officers ran. The security chief ran. I ran too, because when a predator drags your loved one into the center of the mall like a display, the only thing louder than fear is the hope that you might reach them before the door closes again. We burst onto the main floor through a service door near the food court, and the mall looked wrong. Not empty in the usual after-hours way, but emptied on purpose. Store gates down. Atrium lights dimmed. Music off. Even the giant digital ads had gone black, leaving only emergency lighting and the pale glow from a few exit signs. The Santa set area sat in a pool of dim light, like a stage mic, and there in the chair was my mother. She was really there, not on a screen, not behind glass. Her posture was the same unnatural calm hands, folded eyes forward, as if she'd been taught to hold still. I opened my mouth to call her name, and the detective's hand clamped on my arm hard enough to bruise, because he understood what I didn't sound was the trigger. We approached, slowly. Flashlights, lowered weapons, not drawn because a drawn weapon would turn the scene into a chaos he could use. My mother's eyes flicked slightly toward us, and that small movement nearly broke me, because it was proof she was still inside her body somewhere listening. The Santa suit was not behind her. The red sleeve was gone. The only movement in the atrium was the slow sway of a hanging banner in the HVAC draft. The detective signaled 2 officers to flank, to check behind the stacked fake trees to look for any figure in red, but the space held only props and silence. Then I saw a thin line of silver glitter leading away from the chair, not scattered randomly, but laid like a path curving toward a service corridor door near the escalators. The detective saw it too, and his expression tightened with the same realization I'd had under my house. He was guiding us again. My phone buzzed with another message as we stood 10 feet from my mother, and the words on the screen felt like a hand closing around my throat. One step closer, one door opens. Then another message, one door closes. I stared at my mother at the tinsel on her wrists, at the way her fingers trembled just slightly, and I understood the cruelty he had moved her into the open, not to let us rescue her, but to make rescue feel like something that could be earned only through obedience. The detective whispered for an officer to approach from behind the chair and cut the tinsel quietly, and the officer took one careful step. My mother's eyes widened a fraction as if she knew the step mattered. The instant the officer's boot touched the edge of the Santa row, the atrium lights flickered, and every digital screen in the mall flashed on at once. Not ads, but live camera feeds. Different angles of the Santa set area. The officers, the detective, me, my mother. Our bodies displayed on the mall's own. Screens like surveillance turned into entertainment. Then a calm voice rolled out of the ceiling. Speakers, not loud, not booming, just clear enough to be heard everywhere, like an announcement. Look how many people, it said softly. Look how many witnesses. My skin went cold. The detective froze, mid-step jaw clenched, because he understood the trap. If the offender could control the mall's PA, he could control panic. The voice continued, gentle as a holiday greeting. You wanted the world to believe you, it said. So I gave you an audience. The screen showed my mother in the chair from above, and on the edge of one feed, just barely in frame, was a red-gloved hand holding a gift tag. The hand was close enough to my mother's hair to mean whoever it belonged to was standing right behind her, hidden in the shadow the cameras didn't quite catch. Careful, the voice whispered through the speakers. If you rush, you'll leave her behind again. Then the screens went black, simultaneously. The atrium lights dimmed further, and for the briefest moment in that darkness, I heard the soft, rhythmic clicking of a latch from the service corridor door near the escalators, as if it had just accepted a signal. When emergency lights stabilized again, my mother was still in the chair, but the tinsel around her wrists was gone, neatly removed, and in its place was a red ribbon tied in a perfect bow, and attached to that bow was a blank gift tag and a bow pen balanced across her lap, as if the next choice wasn't to him at all, but for me. My mother sat in the Santa chair like a display item, hands folded, eyes open but distant, and the blank gift tag on her lap looked less like paper and more like a verdict, waiting for my handwriting to make it official. The atrium was dimmed on purpose. Emergency glow exit signs, a few stubborn reflections off polished tile, and the dismantled set props around her made the scene feel staged, stacked, fake trees like scenery, the rug centered like a mark, the chair positioned where every camera angle could find it. The detective kept his grip on my forearm, not harsh, but firm, the way you hold onto someone near a ledge, and he whispered that we were not playing the offender's game, that nobody was writing anything, that we were going to extract her, quietly, and get her out of the building. My phone vibrated in my pocket anyway, even though it shouldn't have, and I didn't need to look to know the message would be one of his clean sentences that sounded like advice and functioned like a leash. The officer who'd been told to cut my mother free took one careful step toward the rug, and the moment his boot touched the edge, the atrium lights flickered, and every digital screen in the mall flashed on at once again feeds of us from, overhead from a corridor. Camera from a store, entrance, angle, bodies displayed, like the mall was watching itself. Then the ceiling speakers clicked softly, and his calm voice filled the space like an announcement. Careful, it said, gentle as a holiday reminder. One sound, one door closes. The officer froze, mid-step. The detective's jaw tightened so hard I could see the muscle jump. My mother's eyes shifted slightly toward me, and that small human movement nearly broke me, because it proved she was still there inside her own body, listening, waiting. I felt my throat tighten with her name, and I swallowed it down like a pill because I couldn't bear to see her shoulders twitch again the way they had behind glass. The blank tag and pen sat on her lap in plain view, a dare wrapped in stationery, and I realized the cruelty of it. If I refused to write, I was powerless. If I wrote, I became the mechanism that made the trap work. The detective motioned for two officers to flank the stacked props to look for anyone who read, anyone crouched behind the chair, anyone near the service corridor door, by the escalators, where the latch had clicked, but the space looked empty in. The specific way emptiness looks, when it's intentional, when it's designed to make you imagine someone everywhere at once. My phone buzzed again, and this time I glanced down without meaning to. 2 messages back to back. First, write a name, and a door opens. Second, don't write, and a door closes. My hands went numb. I looked at the tag again, and saw something I hadn't noticed in the dim faint indentations on the blank side, like words that had been pressed into it earlier and then erased. And in the angle of the emergency light, I could almost read the ghost of letters. It wasn't my mother's handwriting. It wasn't mine either. It was his, the same careful pressure, like he'd already rehearsed my obedience on the paper and was waiting for my pen to confirm it. The detective whispered to an officer to take the pen and tag off my mother's lap to remove the choice entirely, and the officer took one slow step forward, arm extended, and the moment his hand entered the pool of light over the chair, ceiling speakers clicked again, and the calm voice returned. Warmer, this time almost pleased. Thank you, it said. You're opening the right door. The rug under the chair shifted just a subtle ripple like fabric tugged from beneath, and my stomach dropped because I remembered the crawl space tunnel under my house, the framed metal edges, the idea that doors don't always sit in walls. The detective's grip tightened on my arm as he noticed it too. Back, he whispered to the officer, but the officer didn't move fast enough, because none of us wanted to make noise, and in that slow half-second, the chair legs sank a fraction, as if the floor had softened. My mother's hands twitched on her lap, The pen rolled a centimeter and stopped, balanced perfectly, as if a hidden hand had steadied it. My mother's eyes found mine fully. Then, and for the first time since she'd been taken, I saw fear in her face. Not blank distance, real fear that recognized what was about to happen. Her lips parted, and no sound came out, but she mouthed something. I understood, anyway, Dot. The detective pulled me back instinctively, but I tore free, because the moment the floor began to move, instincts outranked orders, and I stepped onto the rug quietly, as if quietness could keep gravity from doing what it wanted. My boots sank slightly into the pile, like stepping onto a trap mat, and the screens above us flickered with a new angle. Directly overhead, centered like a camera had been waiting specifically for this. I reached my mother, slid my hands under her forearms, and felt the red ribbon at her wrists tied in a perfect bow, snug enough to restrict without bruising. "Mom," I whispered, barely air, and her eyes filled with tears that didn't fall. The chair sank another fraction. Somewhere beneath the rug, a latch clicked with that patient mechanical certainty I'd come to dread. The detective shouted a single word. "Now." And in that one sound, the ceiling speakers cut off, the screens went black, and the atrium lights dimmed, further, as if punishment had been triggered. My mother's body shifted downward with the chair, a slow, controlled drop. Not a collapse, but an opening, and I understood the design, with sick clarity. A trapdoor under the Santa chair, a return chute built into the mall floor like a secret elevator. Something that could swallow a person in silence if everyone tried to be careful. I grabbed the pen off her lap because it was the only tool he'd offered, and my hand shook so badly the point scraped my skin. I didn't want to write anyone's name. I didn't want to leave any new footprint on his corkboard. But the chair was sinking. My mother's eyes were wide, and the only way his system opened anything was through compliance. I pressed the tag against my palm and wrote the only name I could live with. I wrote my own fast and ugly letters, crooked from shaking, and the instant the ink hit paper, the service corridor door near the escalators snapped open with a loud mechanical clack that echoed across the atrium like a gunshot. The sudden noise made every officer flinch, and in that flinch the chair stopped sinking, as if the system had been satisfied by a trade. One door opened, one drop paused. My mother's shoulders sagged with a shuddering inhale, and I hauled her up and out of the chair with everything I had, dragging her off the rug as the detective and officers surged forward in a coordinated rush. Now that quietness had already been broken. My mother stumbled weak but upright, and the detective caught her and shoved her toward two officers, who immediately guided her away, radios exploding with frantic commands as the building's lights flickered like a heartbeat in panic. I tried to follow, but my wrist ribbon yanked tight, and I realized too late the red ribbon tag he'd tied on me wasn't just decoration. It was attached to something. A thin filament, nearly invisible in the dim, ran from the ribbon tail toward the chair's underside taut as fishing line. When I moved, it pulled me back hard enough to make me gasp, and in that second of resistance, the service corridor door that had snapped open began to close again, slowly patient like a mouth, deciding whether to bite. A red-gloved hand appeared in the narrowing gap of the doorframe, not waving, not frantic, just guiding. And the calm voice returned, not through speakers now, but close behind my ear, intimate as breath. "Careful," it whispered. "You chose the return." I felt a shove at my shoulder, firm and practiced, and I stumbled backward toward the open service corridor like my body had been hooked. The detective turned, saw me, and lunged, but his boots skidded on tile, and the corridor door swung inward, with controlled force closing between us, with a final magnetic thud that made the air vibrate. The last thing I saw before the crack sealed was my mother being led away by officers, her head turning back toward me, mouth opening in a silent scream she couldn't risk making, and then the door shut completely, and the mall went quiet again, as if it had closed a file. When you get pulled through a door you didn't choose, you expect to struggle shouting messy violence. But what I got was silence and fluorescent light, and the soft wheeze of an HVAC vent like I'd been escorted into an office after hours for a meeting I'd forgotten. The service corridor behind the escalators was narrower than it looked from the atrium, lined with grey doors and faded directional arrows. And the second the main door sealed, My phone dropped to NO service again, like a switch had been flipped. The filament attached to my wrist ribbon went slack, and I felt the knot bite my skin as if it had tightened itself in satisfaction. I spun, grabbed at the door handle, and it didn't move. Not locked in the way a normal lock feels, but dead, as if the mechanism had been disconnected from the outside world. "Police?" I shouted, before I could stop myself, and the sound bounced down the corridor and died, without echo, swallowed by insulation and closed doors. Then from behind me his calm voice answered at a conversational volume close enough to make my skin crawl. "You're loud when you're alone," he said, almost amused. I turned and saw him standing a few yards away, in the Santa suit, perfectly composed beard, immaculate hat, straight pale eyes steady on my face. In his gloved hand he held the gift tag I'd written on the one with my name, and he examined my crooked letters like a supervisor reviewing a form. "That was messy," he said softly, "but it worked." I lunged without thinking not to fight him. My body knew fighting wasn't realistic, but to grab the tag, to tear it, to break the ritual. He stepped aside with a smoothness that made my stomach drop, because it meant he'd practiced. My momentum carried me forward, and he caught my wrist easily right on top of the red ribbon, and squeezed just enough to remind me he could. "Careful," he murmured, and his glove was warm in a way that felt wrong. "You don't want to leave bruises. Bruises make stories." He let me go, and I stumbled back, breathing hard, and he walked past me toward a keypad door at the end of the corridor, as if this was his route, and I was just a delivery. "Where's my mother?" I demanded, voice shaking. He didn't look back. "Returned," he said, like the word was a category, not a person. "To your witnesses. You wanted an audience. You got one." The implication landed like a blow. He had let her go, not out of mercy, but to make the system feel like it responded to obedience, to make me believe writing a name could open a door. He stopped at the keypad and pressed 4 digits without hesitation. The door clicked and swung inward, and the smell hit me immediately. Peppermint layered over damp cardboard, old coffee, and dust. His signature scent, the perfume of a place he'd made into his own. Inside was the maintenance office again, or something like it. A larger version of the room I'd seen on screens and through glass corkboards, covered in red ribbon tags, books lined with costumes, not just Santa, but elf vests and generic mall uniforms, filing cabinets, labeled with neat handwriting, and a row of monitors mounted on the wall, most dark one, showing static. On a desk beneath them sat my mother's mug, empty now, placed neatly beside a pen and a stack of blank tags. Seeing that mug in this room again made me feel like my life had been shrunk into props he could rearrange. He stepped inside and motioned me in with the same slow, beckoning curl of fingers I'd seen at the mall set weeks ago, a gesture that once would have looked theatrical and now looked like ownership. "Sit," he said, gently pointing at the torn Santa chair. I didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Instead, he tapped a remote on the desk, and one of the dark monitors flickered on to a camera feed. I recognized instantly my neighbor's living room, empty now, blinds drawn, police tape faintly visible at the edges of the frame. The feed switched with a click to a concrete room, my neighbor seated upright on a folding chair, hands folded, eyes open, but distant red ribbon tied around her wrists in neat bows like gift wrap. My throat tightened. "Stop," I said, and the word came out smaller than I wanted. He tilted his head, patient. "I'm not hurting her," he said. "I'm keeping her. Keeping is cleaner." He set the tag with my name on the desk and smoothed it flat with 2 fingers, like it deserved respect. "You did well," he continued, voice almost approval. "You wrote yourself. That was the correct kind of careful. You didn't leave someone else behind." The praise made my stomach turn because it meant he understood the moral trap as well as I did. "Who are you?" I demanded, and this time I meant it beyond the costume. He smiled slightly, and for the first time I saw irritation flicker at the edge of his calm, like a mask tugged too hard. "Names are doors," he said. "People think their identities, their access." He opened a drawer and pulled out a laminated badge, the same style as more credentials, and held it up. It read, "Gordon Pritchard," in bold letters. "This door still opens," he said, softly. Dead people don't complain. Then he set it down and reached into a folder. My folder, the incident file he baited me with, and slid out a different document, a vendor contract with an IT company letterhead, dated years earlier, showing system privileges and maintenance, access tied to a role. In the signature block was a name I hadn't seen before, printed clearly, not handwritten. He tapped it with his gloved finger. "This is the door you want," he moaned. The name was short, ordinary, the kind you'd forget in a day, and that ordinariness made it terrifying because it meant he wasn't a ghost. He was a person who'd hidden inside paperwork. I stared at the name and forced my brain to hold onto it like a weapon. He watched me reading and smiled, as if he'd planned that too. "Good," he said. "You're learning." He stepped closer and I could smell peppermint and something metallic beneath it, like cold keys. "Here is the new exchange," he said. "Your mother is returned. The girl is returned. The neighbor stays until you close your mouth. No more detectives. No more security chief. No more witnesses." He gestured to the corkboard, and my eyes snagged on a cluster of tags pinned in neat rows. I saw not just names, but patterns. Employees from different businesses, delivery drivers, a nurse from the urgent care, a janitor from a school pupil, whose jobs gave them keys, codes, access to places that should have been safe. He didn't collect children or monsters. He collected doors that could open other doors. "You built a network," I whispered, and my voice shook. His smile widened a fraction. "I organized one," he corrected. "People build it for me by being careless." He pointed at my wrist ribbon. "You're part of it now," he added. "You wrote yourself." I swallowed hard, and my mind did the only math it could. If names were doors, then the only way to break his system was to jam the door he used most, the one he wore, the badge, the dead man's name, the vendor contract name I'd just seen. I stepped backward slowly, eyes on his face, and my fingers brushed the stack of blank tags on the desk. He watched my hand with mild interest, not alarmed, as if he believed I'd been trained. "Right," he said, voice gentle, and he slid a blank tag and pen toward me like a hostess offering a guest book. My throat tightened. On the monitor, my neighbor's eyes shifted slightly, a tiny movement that looked like a plea. I picked up the pen, and the room held its breath in my mind. I didn't write my neighbor's name. I didn't write the detectives. I didn't write my mother's, because she was already returned and I refused to drag her back. I wrote the vendor contract name I'd just read, the ordinary printed name that belonged to someone real, because I needed the world to have a handle to grab, and if he believed names were doors, then his own should open the fastest for the purpose. Police, waiting outside. The moment my pen lifted, the overhead lights flickered, and the keypad door behind him beeped rapidly, as if it had received a new access request. His pale eyes narrowed for the first time. Not calm now, not patient, something sharp and angry surfacing under the Santa performance. "No," he said quietly, and he lunged toward the desk, reaching for the tag. But the room answered the ink faster than his glove could. Somewhere beyond the wall, a heavy door clanked. A real industrial lock, releasing with a sound too loud to ignore, and in the same instant, my phone dead moments ago flashed to full bars and began ringing with a call from the detective's number, like the building had suddenly remembered it belonged to, the outside world. The Santa figure froze, head tilting not in curiosity, but in calculation, and for a split second the mask slipped enough for me to see what was underneath. Not supernatural, not demonic, just human fury at losing control of a system he'd kept, tidy for years. He snatched the tag from the desk and tore it in half with violent precision, then tore it again, then again, as if shredding paper could close what had already opened. "Careless," he hissed, the first harsh sound I'd ever heard from him, and the word felt like a confession. In the corridor outside I heard distant boots and shouted commands, real voices, real urgency, closing in through a door I hadn't known existed. The Santa suit turned toward the keypad door hand, moving to the remote aisle, scanning for an exit route, and I understood with sick clarity that even if police breached this room, he might still slip into a tunnel, into a vent, into the spaces beneath our lives. My phone kept ringing in my pocket, a lifeline I didn't dare answer. because sound still felt like a door, and the last thing I saw before the Santa figure ducked into the shadows beside the corkboards was the red ribbon on my wrist, tightening as if someone had tugged it from the other side, reminding me that even when one door opens, another can still close. The first time I heard my own name shouted like a warning wasn't from a loved one. In panic, it was from the detective's voice cracking through my phone as boots thundered somewhere beyond the walls. And in that moment I understood the sick elegance of his system. He hated noise, but he knew exactly how to create it when it served him. My pocket vibrated with the call. I'd been too afraid to answer the screen, flashing the detective's name like a lifeline, and I finally pressed accept, because the room had already been forced into chaos by the door I'd opened with ink. "Where are you?" the detective barked. Not gentle, not careful, because careful had gotten us nowhere. I swallowed, forcing my lungs to work, and kept my voice low, even though my heart was slamming hard enough to shake the ribbon on my wrist. "Lower level," I whispered. "Back corridor behind the escalators." He pulled me through. There's a keypad door into a maintenance office. Monitors. Tags. My neighbor is on one of the feeds. He's here. The Santa figure, no longer a performance, just a man in a costume moved in the shadows beside the corkboards, with the speed of someone who'd rehearsed every route, and for a second all I saw was red fabric sliding between filing cabinets and shelves like a curtain being drawn. The calm voice was gone. In its place was a silence full of intent. I heard a latch click somewhere deeper in the space, and the keypad door at the corridor end beeped again, rapid and irritated, as if it was receiving conflicting orders. The detective's voice on my phone tightened. "Stay where you are," he said. "Do not chase. We're breaching from the sealed corridor. You can't disappear through closed exits." I almost laughed, bitter and small, because exits were exactly what he collected doors nobody remembered. The overhead lights flickered once, and the static monitor on the wall cleared for half a second to show a new angle. My mother in the Santa chair on the main floor, officers around her, my face ghosted in the corner of the feed, and then the rand image cut out, as if the system resented being forced to show truth. A heavy impact echoed from the corridor, outside metal on metal, followed by shouted commands muffled by distance, and the Santa suit froze, head tilting not in curiosity, but in calculation, listening the way a predator listens when it realizes. The room's rules have changed. My red ribbon tightened sharply, not because it physically pulled, but because my skin remembered being yanked through a door and I backed toward the desk, eyes darting for anything that wasn't a weapon but could still be leverage. The desk was clean in that disturbing way. His spaces always were, blank tags, stacked pens aligned, my mother's mug placed like a centerpiece, and then my gaze snagged on something half hidden beneath the folders, a thin metal badge, lanyard with an ID card attached, not the Gordon badge he'd brandished earlier, but a newer one, the kind with a photo and a barcode. I saw only the corner of a face and a printed company name, and my brain grabbed at it like a rope. He moved again, and this time I heard fabric scrape against metal, followed by the soft slide of a panel near the baseboard. A vent. A crawl space. The same language as my house. He was going to vanish into infrastructure again, and every part of me wanted to scream to the detective, but screaming was his trigger, and I refused to feed him the sound. I raised my phone and spoke quickly, barely above breath. "He's going for a vent," I said. "By the corkboard's low right wall. There's a slide panel." The detective's reply came instantly sharp with adrenaline. "Copy. Units vent egress. Now." In the corridor outside, boots shifted direction, voices tightened, and then the keypad door behind me suddenly clacked, as if it had released an industrial sound, heavy and real, not a polite electronic beep. The Santa suit snapped its head toward the sound, and for the first time his posture betrayed something close to fear, because fear is what happens when a person used to controlling doors realizes someone else has found the master key. The door swung inward, a crack and a slice of bright flashlight beam stabbed into the room. "Police," someone shouted, and the word filled the space like a flood. The Santa suit moved fast. too fast for a bulky costume, ducking behind a shelf and yanking the beard loose in one practiced motion, ripping away the white hair and tossing it aside like shedding skin. The beard hit the floor near my feet, and the sight of it, cheap mesh backing, elastic strap, synthetic fibers, made my stomach turn, because it proved what I'd known all along. There was no magic here, only planning. The flashlight beam swept, caught the beard, caught my face, and an officer's silhouette filled the doorway. "Hands up," he yelled. I lifted my hands instantly, palms open and pointed with trembling fingers toward the shelves. "He's there," I said. The officer's partner surged in weapon raised, and the Santa suit burst from behind the shelf, without the beard, now face, still partially shadowed by the hat. But I caught a glimpse of skin, pale, sweaty, human, and eyes that were not supernatural at all, just furious. He shoved the shelf hard as he ran, sending binders and folders cascading to the floor in a messy crash that felt like sacrilege in his tidy world. The officer lunged, but the man's hand found the slide panel by instinct, and he dropped to the floor, shoulders compressing, as he wriggled into the vent opening, like he'd done it 1,000 times. "Stop!" the officer shouted, grabbing at the hem of the red coat, but the fabric tore with a ripping sound that made me flinch, and the man vanished into the dark with a final scrape of boots against metal. The vent panel slapped half-closed behind him, as if the building wanted to hide its secret again. Officers swore and dropped to their knees, shining flashlights into the opening, and the detective's voice erupted in the corridor outside, ordering units to cover exterior vents, cover roof access, cover every service exit. For a moment the room was chaos, papers everywhere, costume pieces on the floor, officers barking into radios, and in that chaos I felt something loosen on my wrist. The red ribbon, which had felt like a leash for days, slackened as if the tension had shifted to another point in the system. I looked down and saw the knot had been cut cleanly, precisely, without me feeling a blade. My breath stopped. He had done it while running. He had freed my wrist as a gesture, not of kindness, but of message. "You're not the one I'm keeping right now." "Where's the neighbor?" I blurted, voice shaking. An officer pointed at the monitors, now flickering, as if the system was fighting to stay alive. The feed showed my neighbor still upright on a folding chair, eyes open, hands folded, red ribbon, bows at her wrists, her face pale and stunned. The detective pushed into the room, eyes scanning, and his gaze hardened at the sight of the feed. "Find that room," he snapped. "Now." The head of mall security arrived behind him, face gray, and stammered about out of service corridors. The detective grabbed the laminated map off the floor, torn from my earlier mess, half of it missing, and pressed it flat with his palm. "Where does this lead?" he demanded. The security chief pointed, with a shaking finger. "That vent route," he said. "It ties into the old maintenance spine. It can pop up in electrical and storage, in the security office." He stopped speaking when he realized what he'd just admitted the place. My neighbor had been photographed under the security office. Sign was not just accessible, it was part of the spine. The detective's eyes snapped up. "Clear the security office," he ordered. "Lock it down. Search behind the panels." Officers ran, radios crackled, and I stood in the wrecked maintenance office with Santa beard at my feet and the smell of peppermint still clinging to the air like a stain. My phone buzzed one more time and I almost dropped it. Unknown number. One photo. It showed the vent opening from the inside, looking outward like a camera mounted in the dark. In the frame were three things: an officer's flashlight beam, the torn hem of the Santa coat, and in the lower corner, a gloved hand holding a blank gift tag and pen. Under the photo, one line in neat handwriting: "You opened a door." I kept the pen. Then, through the din of radios, we heard a shout from down the corridor, someone yelling that they'd found a false wall in the security office, and the detective bolted. I followed because my body couldn't stay still anymore, because stillness was where he kept people. We ran through back halls, past stacked props and dead seasonal displays, until we reached the security office and saw officers dragging a panel away from the wall to reveal a narrow compartment behind the monitors deep enough to hide a plaque. "Person upright." The compartment was empty, but it held the residue of his ritual's silver glitter in a perfect circle, a red ribbon bow tied to a hook, and a single gift tag pinned dead center, blank on the front, written on the back: "Return, pending." My lungs burned. Where is she? I whispered, and the detective's face tightened as he realized what the message meant. The neighbor wasn't in the room anymore. She had been moved again, returned back into the spine. Her radio crackled with a new report. An officer outside had found an access hatch in the side yard near my house. Disturbed lattice, loosened fresh glitter on the ground, and my stomach dropped because it meant he was retreating along the route that started under my foundation. The detective swore, then looked at me with a kind of grim honesty that felt like a door slamming. "He's going home," he said. "You're home." And in that instant, the victory of almost catching him evaporated, replaced by a colder truth. The mole wasn't the only building he had wired into his system. It had just been the loudest stage. The first thing I saw when we reached my street was my front porch light blinking in the same steady rhythm as my Christmas lights, and that simple domestic pattern made me sick because it felt like proof he'd been inside long enough to enjoy the symmetry. Police cars lined the curb now, neighbors peeking from windows, radios chattering, and the whole block looked like an emergency that people would gossip about for weeks. But gossip is just another way of leaving footprints behind. The detective ordered officers to clear my yard, to check the lattice access point, to sweep the crawlspace routes, and I stood at the edge of my driveway, watching my own home become a perimeter. My mother returned to a safe location under guard Danny, still with an officer, and my neighbor still missing. Somewhere inside the spine he'd built beneath us. The lattice on the side yard was loosened again. The screws lined up neatly on the ground like someone had removed them with care, and beside the opening was a thin circle of silver glitter pressed into the snowless dirt like a stamp. An officer crawled in with a flashlight and emerged with a tight face. "It connects," he said. "It goes under the foundation. It branches." The detective's jaw tightened. "How far?" he asked. The officer shook his head. "Further than it should," he replied, and that was the problem in a sentence. They sealed the lattice temporarily, brought in a K9 unit, but the dog hesitated at the opening, whining softly, refusing to commit, and the handler's expression shifted from confidence to unease, because animals don't respect our need for normal explanations. The detective ordered a controlled entry from my basement, and when officers breached my basement door, the circle of Christmas lights was still there on the concrete, glowing steadily around Danny's purse like an altar. Seeing it in the harsh beam of police flashlights made it look less supernatural and more obscene, a human being insisting on ritual inside someone else's house. They pulled the vent cover and crawled into the framed metal passage beneath my home, and for the first time I heard law enforcement describe the thing I'd been living with in official terms: reinforced structure, concealed access, improvised, corridor, multiple egress points, evidence of prolonged occupation. Hearing those words didn't comfort me. It made the nightmare feel engineered, which meant it could exist anywhere someone had time, patience, and access to the right doors. Minutes later, an officer's voice crackled over the radio. "We found another room." The detective moved fast, and I followed because my body refused to stay behind again. They led us into the tunnel to the small concrete room where I'd freed Danny, and it looked different now. Not messier, but cleaner, as if someone had reset it after we escaped. The hook still held costume pieces, but the Santa coat that had been there was gone, replaced by a plain grey hoodie on a hanger like he'd changed skins. The corkboard still held tags, but the rows had been thinned, many removed, leaving empty pinholes like missing teeth. The hidden keypad door in the corner was open now, not forced, just open, and inside was a deeper corridor that led away from my house like a vein. The detective stepped through with a flashlight, officers fanning out, and the air grew colder as the passage angled toward the street. We reached a junction where the corridor split again, and on the wall at the split was a handwritten sign taped neatly at eye level. Left for quiet, right for questions. Beneath it, a blank gift tag, pinned with a red ribbon pen, clipped to it like a suggestion. The detective cursed under his breath. "He's marking routes," he said. "He's guiding us." An officer called out from the right-hand route. "We've got a door." They found a heavy metal hatch, set into a concrete wall, the kind you'd see in utility infrastructure, with a simple key lock. The detective tried to force it. It didn't budge. An evidence tech photographed it, and as the flash went off, my phone buzzed in my pocket. even though I had full service now. Unknown number. One message, don't break my door. My stomach dropped and I understood the timing. He could see the flash through his cameras, could feel the attention like pressure on a nerve. The detective didn't hesitate. Cut it, he ordered, and a tool screamed against metal, showering sparks in the narrow corridor. The hatch finally gave with a groan and swung outward, and cold outside air rushed in. On the other side wasn't open ground. It was another confined space, a culvert-like utility run that led under the street. And there in the center of that run sat my neighbor upright on a folding chair, hands folded, eyes open but distant red ribbon, bows at her wrists, exactly like the photo, returned, like a package, waiting to be scanned. For a heartbeat, nobody moved because the sight was too wrong. Then officers surged forward, cutting the ribbons, checking her pulse, speaking her name loudly, and she blinked slowly as if waking from a forced stillness. "Ma'am, an officer," said voice steady, "you're safe. You're with police." My neighbor's lips parted. He said you'd come," she whispered, voice thin. The detective leaned close. "Did you see him?" he asked. My neighbor's eyes flicked toward the tunnel behind her, then back, and she shook her head, terrified. "I heard him," she whispered. He talked like he was smiling. He kept saying I was a good witness. Rage burned in my throat, and I stepped forward, unable to stop myself. "What else?" I asked. My neighbor's gaze snapped to my wrist, where the ribbon had been now cut, leaving a faint red mark like a memory. "He knew about that," she whispered. "He knew you'd rat. He said you tried to be brave." The detective's face tightened. "What did he want?" he asked. My neighbor swallowed hard. "He wanted me to be quiet," she said. "He wanted me to stop calling for help. He said help is how you leave people behind." As officers escorted her out through the hatch, the tunnel lights flickered once, then steadied, and I felt my stomach turn because the flicker felt like a wink. The detective ordered a deeper sweep of the culvert route, but it branched again and again, and at a certain point, even flashlights and radios started feeling small, because the system wasn't one room, it was a map. They found evidence of movement, fresh scuff marks, silver glitter pressed into seams, a torn piece of red fabric snagged on a bolt, but they didn't find it. They never found it that night. They did, however, find what he wanted us to find, because he always wanted the story to end on his punctuation, in the deepest branch they reached before deciding it was unsafe to proceed without structural support. An officer's flashlight caught a corkboard mounted to the wall like a shrine. On it were 3 gift tags pinned in a neat row. My mother's name, my neighbor's name, Danny's name. All 3 had a single bold line drawn through them in black ink, as if cancelled. Beneath them was my name pinned, last, also crossed out. At the bottom of the board was a final blank tag, and beside it, taped neatly, was a strip of paper from a printer, the kind that spits out receipts. On it, in plain typed font, was a sentence that made my skin go cold, because it sounded like the most reasonable thing in the world. "Thank you for your cooperation." The detective stared at it for a long time, then looked at me, and in his eyes I saw the shape of a truth he didn't want to say out loud. We had rescued bodies, but we had not closed the system. We went back to my neighbor's house, back to my mother, under guard, back to statements and evidence bags and interviews, and by morning the story on the street would become a headline about a suspect in hidden tunnels and mall security. Breach something people could consume, like entertainment. But that was his whole point. He used holidays, because holidays already teach people to accept rituals without question. They teach you to open doors for strangers in costumes, to trust the familiar symbols, to believe that the right words and the right lists and the right behavior will bring good things back. Weeks later, when the police finally reopened my home after tearing up parts of the foundation and sealing off the tunnel, I found one last gift bag on my kitchen table, scented neatly like a place setter. Inside was a single red ribbon tag and a pen. The tag was blank on the front. On the back, in that careful handwriting that had learned all my weak points, was one line, "See you next season." I didn't scream. I didn't call anyone. I just stared at it until the ink blurred, because the final lesson had already been taught. And it was the reason I will never celebrate Christmas again once you've learned that doors can be trained. You start hearing latches in every quiet house and every blinking light feels like a countdown to the moment someone decides it's time to return.